Hey folks, this is Mark Devine with the Unbeatable Mind podcast. Thanks for joining me today. Welcome back. I appreciate that you're, taking your time to listen to this podcast and to share these interesting things that we're exploring here, because I know your time is valuable and you got a million things vying for your attention. So super appreciate it, and I'm humbled for your attention. Today I've got Dr. Andrew Huberman. We'll just call him Andrew, who is a neuroscientist. Is that right, Andrew? Neuroscientist? Right. Okay. Not a brain surgeon, but a neuroscientist from Stanford. And I'm going to give him a more formal introduction in a moment. But before I do, let me remind you, and I'm going to say this a few more times on this podcast, but we've got our summit coming up. We've got about 20 slots left. This is an extraordinary event, and it's the last year we're going to run it in the same format that we've run. We'll be changing it up next year. So if you heard about it and you're on the fence, then this is your opportunity to come, maybe your last opportunity to come. It's November 29th to December 2nd, Carlsbad. 3 days of really awesome Unbeatable Mind training, some terrific speakers, connection with your tribe, your boat crew, accountability, and we'll be building our 5-mountain integrated training plan for 2019. And if you'd like to come or you're thinking about it, go check it out at summit.unbeatablemind.com. And if you decide to pull the trigger, I'll give you $300 off, and use the code POD300, POD300. Also, a quick update on our burpees for vets. I don't know, Andrew, if you've heard this, but we're doing 22 million burpees this year. We had a small tribe of a couple hundred people who jumped on the bandwagon with me.
Impressive.
Yeah, 22 million, and the goal is to raise money and awareness for vets who are suffering from post-traumatic stress. You know how big a problem that is. A lot of it is associated with brain health and meaning and tribe and traction, stuff like that. Just not really having a sense of purpose after these guys get out of the military, or the ladies. So we're suffering for them. So each of us have selected a number. Mine is 100,000, which means I'm doing 300 a day, even on my broken foot, right?
Fantastic.
It's no big deal. So we're going to raise $250,000, and it's through the Courage Foundation. If you want to learn more, go to burpeesforvets.com. If you want to check out the Courage Foundation, go to feedcourage.org. Thanks for your support. All right, so here's the formal intro. Andrew Huberman, American neuroscientist. Why did we have to say American? Yeah. Okay, a neuroscientist. I'm just reading this. He's an American neuroscientist. He's a professor up at Stanford University. He's got his lab up there. He's making super interesting contributions to the fields of brain development, plasticity, neural regeneration and repair. I'm going to talk to him about a lot of things: breathing, neuroplasticity, how the eyes and the brain receive information and also affect your environment, courage and fear. So really interesting stuff. Dr. Huberman got his PhD from UC Davis. He did all his postdoc work up at Stanford. For a while, he was down here at San Diego at the Salk Institute, which is right down the road from me. He runs his lab, like I said, the Huberman lab up at Stanford. We've got a lot to talk about, so thanks for being here, Andrew. And I appreciate the personal visit.
Oh, well, thanks for having me here. I've heard a lot about you and your program here, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, likewise. As you know, Unbeatable Mind and my background as a SEAL and as a yogi and as a martial artist is really the subjective side of neuroscience. Like I really, approach things through trial and error, through experimentation, and relying on, the word of people who've been doing breathing techniques and visualization and meditation, and also my SEAL training and candidates who have succeeded. And I always find it fascinating when someone comes from the opposite side of the spectrum, the objective perspective, to say, what is really happening in the brain when you do these things, or how can we combine, objective and subjective, or east and west, to create a better or fuller picture. So, but before we get into details, tell us about yourself. Where'd you grow up? What were some of the influences in your life that led you, kind of on the path you are today?
So I was actually born in Stanford Hospital.
No kidding.
My dad's from South America. My mom's from the East Coast. They moved to the area long before there was internet or Silicon Valley, and when it was a reasonably priced place to live for most people. That's why they landed there. My dad was and is a scientist. He's a theoretical physicist. There wasn't much physics in South America, no opportunities for physicists. So actually he came to the United States on a naval scholarship.
Really?
Yep. So
So did he have to work for the Navy?
He's done some work in contract with the military, but he eventually became a particle physicist. He was involved in the early development of chaos theory.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah, so I grew up.
So you had some brains in your family.
I had some brains in my family. And my mom's a children's book writer, and growing up, I would say from 0 to about 12, I had a pretty normal childhood from the standpoint of growing up playing with kids down the street. Everything was kind of typical American household, and I had a lot of influence in terms of thinking about science and the world. And so I can remember a conversation with my dad. He used to walk me down the street on my way to kindergarten, and then he would let me go at a certain point because I used to pick up this young lady, also a kindergartner, to go to school. And I think he said something like, "You don't want me there when you pick her up. It's good if you just take her on your own." He's a kind of old-fashioned guy, being Argentine. Yeah. And I remember asking him, and we both remember the conversation, so I don't think we're confabulating here, but I said, "What do you do?" And he said, I try and figure out how the universe works. And I said, do you like it? And he said, I'll never forget his answer. He said, for me, it's like the same feeling that you have when it's your birthday the next day. That's how I feel every single day when I go to work.
Way.
And I thought, wow, like that I could relate to the feeling. And he was wise enough to tell me about the feeling, because as opposed to giving me a bunch of details about what he did, which I wouldn't understand. And so I said, okay, well, I want to do that. And he also had the wisdom to say, actually, you don't want to do physics, because by the time you're old enough to do physics, most of the major problems are going to be worked out. And I said,
do you think he was right?
He insisted.
I
have physics colleagues that might disagree.
That might be a myopic point of view. Right?
I think he felt like that there's a golden age and a golden opportunity to get into science, and I'll talk about that a little bit in terms of my neuroscience career, because I feel blessed enough to have entered neuroscience very young, and I really felt like I came into it at the best time in terms of tools and relationships.
Well, and also I see what he's saying in terms of like having like a broad, profound impact on the body of knowledge, as opposed to like when it gets more and more refined and you're just studying more narrow and narrow things once the field gets fully fleshed out, so to speak.
Yeah, if you want to crack into new problems that people haven't had access to. I don't really like the phrase low-hanging fruit, but in some sense low-hanging fruit.
Makes sense, yeah.
And so I said, well, what should I do then? And he said, well, we don't know much about the brain. And I said, okay, well, I'll do that. And so I remember that conversation, and
so that was when you were a teenager.
So I was 6 when we had that conversation.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I've always been very curious about the world, and I love animals. I think animal movement in particular, but animal cognition has a lot to teach us about how the brain works, and kind of its fundamentals. And we could talk about that in terms of, we love to think about the human animal so much in terms of our brain machinery and what makes us so advanced, but a lot of what drives us are more primitive circuitries that animals can tell us a lot about, because each one represents a kind of extreme form of those circuitries. In any event, so that was an early event that I remember well. And then for better or for worse, probably a little bit of both, from about 12 to 19, I was actually a pretty troubled kid. My parents had a very high conflict divorce. And at that time there weren't that many divorced families. Back then they called them broken homes. Now you would never hear that phrase, right? Yeah. And it was just one of these circumstances where I went from a lot of structure to very little structure. So I actually spent very little time in high school. I was not a very good student. I had got into a lot of fights. I was pretty wild kid. I fell deeply into the skateboarding community, which was a great thing for me at the time. Actually, some of the guys that I knew back then have gone on to have tremendous careers in skateboarding and things related to it. But there was really no parental oversight. I was never really into drugs and alcohol, never really liked that. But I definitely had a lot of aggression. I had a lot of intensity, and I didn't know where to put it. So it was skateboarding, and then I'd get into fights, and we were feral kids. And so, we basically just kind of ran ourselves, and,
You had brothers and sisters?
I had an older sister, but mainly I was hanging around with, skateboarding is an interesting sport, because you get kids, you go to a skate park and you get kids that are like 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 hanging out with full grown adults. And so I was exposed to a lot in those years. And it was a small community then, so I say for better or for worse, because I feel really blessed to have had that kind of freedom and exposure. So I started spending a lot of time in San Francisco, hung out with a lot of guys that who grew up a lot harder than I did, saw a lot of drugs, saw a lot of violence. I had a good friend get killed. I had a good friend commit suicide. A good friend do enough methamphetamine to go schizophrenic. So I was exposed to a lot of kind of hardship.
I can see that being the good side, right? I mean, as hard as it was, you got the school of hard knocks early in your life.
Yeah, it was.
The other thing I might point out is now knowing what we know about how the brain develops, for a teenage brain to be doing skateboarding and all of that, complex dynamic balancing and constant movement and pushing the envelope of what the body can do was probably pretty extraordinary. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
I don't know if you could ever like reflect back on how your brain would have developed if you hadn't done that,
Yeah, it's interesting. Working, in some ways, it has a lot of similarities to science in the sense that, I got comfortable working very hard at one thing over and over and over and over.
Repetition.
And there was some social reinforcement for getting it right.
Right.
And it was a lot of fun, and it hurt, and I'm comfortable with pain. I understood the relationship between effort and pain and outcomes pretty early on.
Right.
And so I continued that for a while, but then it became clear to me that I wasn't going to be a professional skateboarder. I wasn't going to do much. And at that time, I had my first girlfriend, and she made the good decision to go off to college. So she went off to UC Santa Barbara, where I realized that if I didn't get down there, I was going to lose her. So I actually camped out in the parking lot outside her dorm because I was a year behind her in school, hung out, and at that time I had pretty much dropped skateboarding, and I gotten into Muay Thai kickboxing.
Okay.
I really liked the martial arts. I needed something to put my aggression and my energy into, and Muay Thai showed up in my life, and so started doing Thai boxing, and loved that. Went off to school in Santa Barbara. Somehow, I have no idea how, but I took the SAT and I managed to get in. Probably some early schooling helped me there with kind of the basics.
Did you graduate from high school?
I did graduate high school,
okay.
Not with high honors. Actually, I showed up at graduation. A lot of people were like, "What are you doing here?"
Who are you?
But went down to Santa Barbara, and my first year was a total disaster. People were partying hard. I was just totally distracted by the social components, and still getting into fights, and just really just kind of a mess. And so it was January 4th, 1994. I remember very well. I got into a fight with a bunch of guys. It was totally pointless. It was one of those things, like most street violence, it could be avoided. I mean, they initiated it, but there was an out, and I didn't take it. And I remember walking back to the place where I was staying. At that time, I was delivering bagels, living with a pet ferret in this like squat of a place, because I had learned in those years, why pay rent when you can just stay in an empty place. I'd become pretty street smart.
Wow.
But that day, I realized that okay, I'm 19 years old.
This is going nowhere.
This is not going anywhere. Sooner or later, I'm gonna end up dead or in jail. And so what I did is I moved home, put myself into community college. I didn't quit Santa Barbara. I took a leave of absence, which is different. Moved home, went to community college. I considered briefly becoming a firefighter because I liked physical engagement. I think physical engagement is really key still for me now in terms of kind of anchoring in practices. But I made this decision. I said, okay, I don't care what it is, but I'm going to do something in academics because I think my body might not keep up over time. I don't know if I can ever become a professional athlete, but I think I have a pretty good mind, and I was blessed with that by virtue of maybe some genetics and some early upbringing, and I'm going to give it a go. And so I went from basically like a straight C student to a straight A student. I went back to Santa Barbara. I lived alone, and for me it was weight training, running, and studying. And I set my goals then, and I wrote them down as a PhD at 30. I wanted to be a professor by the time I was 35, and I wanted tenure by the time I was 40.
No kidding.
I'm happy to say I made those marks, not without a lot of commitment and work and sacrifice, but I had so much fun. And then it's funny, I don't think
naturally studying brain, that came from your father in the early childhood stuff.
Yeah, so I've committed my adult professional life to trying to understand how the brain works, how it can change, and then in more recent years, I decided look, I think academic papers and publications and coming up through the ranks is great, but there's a lot that neuroscience has to provide the general public.
Right.
How can I educate the general public about those things and also start to connect with people that are familiar with practices that can make us better, much in the same way that people can augment their physical body and health. There are ways to make your mind better. And so this is an especially suitable podcast to be discussing this. Right. So I made, I have a couple friends I'm close with who were in the SEAL team community, some friends in the martial arts community, people in the art community. I think there's a lot to learn from every, I don't want to call them subcultures, but from these micro tribes or tribes. And some of those more clandestine tribes, as you know, have real gifts to offer the general public in the form of things that are not just information, but are actionable. And I think the mind is still, to me, the most exciting and important problem that for me to work on anyway. And anyway, that's the arc of the story.
Mind is everything, right? The mind, everything we create in the world comes from our mind. First, we think it, we see it, think it, and then we create it. You just described basically the whole rationale behind my program, Unbeatable Mind. I mean, I started training SEAL candidates in 2007, and I don't know if you know this, but it's interesting to talk about. I was very much, because of my experience in SEAL training, because of my deep immersion in Zen and the martial arts, and I would do these like long retreats at the Zen Mountain Monastery where we mix hardcore karate training with our, with Zen monks, sitting us down for hours a day. I had, profound transformation through those immersive environments. And so when I started training the SEALs, at first I was doing it on a government contract, and they wouldn't let me do what I wanted to do. And fortuitously, I got the contract stolen from me by Blackwater, billion-dollar company. And so I said, well, I'm going to start training people, just privately, and people who want to pay, are okay to pay. That was the foundation of SEALFIT. And then I said, I really want to create kind of an American warrior monk academy. And so I launched a 30-day SEALFIT Academy. And people were coming and living with me, only like 4 or 5 or 6 at a time initially. And so for 30 days, I would train from 5 in the morning until 7 or 8 at night, sometimes around the clock. And we would cap it off with what's now the 50-hour Kokoro camp, which was like a Hell Week simulation. And these individuals were just going through this crazy transformation, like physical studs, and totally focused. And they were all going through buds and just dominating, right? 90% success rate. Wow. Well, during this period, you can, the physical part was pretty easy. Like I put together elements of CrossFit and strength training and Navy SEAL style training. And I said, what do these guys need to do to be prepared for combat? Let's prepare them for combat. And if they're prepared for that, then buds will be easy. So that became the SEALFIT Operator WADs. But then I said, well, what do I have to draw for the mental training? Because the SEALs didn't do mental training, believe it or not. It just kind of happened, right? They had one class for me when I went through buds on the Big 4. And it was interesting, but they didn't teach us how to do it. And so I said, well, where else have I gotten this training? I said, well, I got it from Nakamura and the martial arts, and I've gotten it from yoga, and I've practiced this stuff for years on my own. So this is what it's going to be. And so I built Unbeatable Mind, and it was all basically coddled together from practices that have been around for thousands of years. So the information for how to develop the mind is old. You know what I mean? It's old. The whole science of yoga, Tibetan Buddhism, Dzogchen Buddhism, all this is all about mental development.
Agreed.
And now, people think this is some mystery. And so I kind of like to take the foo out of the kung fu and just strip it from all that cultural bullshit and just offer it up in simple practices like the box breathing we talked about. So anyways, I don't know why I needed to go into that history lesson there, but I thought it'd be informative. Like that's where I'm fascinated. But I've, like I said earlier before we started, I don't really have much grounding in what's happening in neuroscience besides what I've read and podcasted, with folks. So I guess bringing it back to you, what is the sweet spot for you in terms of how you can educate the public on a way that they'll accept it, besides just, hey, Mark Devine's a Navy SEAL, and if he says it works, it must work, right? Because for me, that's gotten me so far. But
well, you guys have a lot of credibility.
We have a lot of creds, but we need the science behind it. So what's the sweet spot in terms of educating the public about how to improve their brains functioning and health and whatnot?
Yeah, I mean, one of my main directives for my life at this point is to try and educate people about what we do know about how the brain works, because I won't claim to know everything about how the brain works, certainly, and we don't as a field yet know. I mean, it is extremely mysterious still.
And we're talking about the brain, you mean the biological organ of the brain, or are you talking about the mind?
Yeah, probably
Or
the
both?
proper way to phrase it would be the nervous system. So because that would include the brain and body, and
Brain and body,
and then of course and all the things that interface with the nervous system, like the gut and the vascular system. So the whole self, really.
So do you believe that the body is the mind, the whole body, and the brain would be the executive governing agent?
Yes, except that I prefer to just think about it as the nervous system, because you know, for instance, there's and some people are now hearing more about things like polyvagal theory, and you know, the vagus. So I teach neuroanatomy to medical students and have for a long time at San Diego and at Stanford. If I were to pull out the vagus nerve from a human and place it on the table in front of us, you would be blown away by how extensive this thing is.
Really?
It's a superhighway. And the idea that the vagus nerve is only parasympathetic, sort of more only on the, you know, quote unquote calming end of the nervous system, is just false. It's got sympathetic branches. It goes everywhere from up near the ears to innervating all these internal organs. It's like its own.
And the vagus nerve goes on the front of the body, right?
That's right.
It's not the spine. It's not related to the spinal nervous system.
Not intricately, no.
Right.
And so you know, it has so many branches with so many connections that you could almost think of it as its own main branch in the nervous system. So we have central nervous system, peripheral nervous system. There's enteric nervous system,
the gut, right?
which is the gut for sensing when your gut is full. So I just like
And
to think about the nervous
these
system.
all relate with the vagus nerve.
That's
the
right.
heart mind and the gut and mind is what we've been,
That's
not, you know, at least what I've been intuiting in the research is that's communicates with the brain through the vagus system.
That's right. That's right. And so, you know, my lab these days is working a lot on how peripheral states, meaning breathing and heart rate and levels of autonomic arousal, interface with how the brain proper, the part that's in the skull, is working to influence decision making under threat and things of that sort. We could talk about that, but you know,
before we go there, is there any condition where an individual would be cut off from their vagus nervous system, vagal, just like, you know, you say a spinal injury. We were talking about my friend Dr. John Atwater, who has a spinal cord injury, so he's obviously cut off from some of the you know, functioning of his.
It's an interesting question. I'm not aware of any. I mean, the vagus nerve, like most peripherally located nerves, will regenerate.
Okay,
so brain and spinal cord, central nervous system won't regenerate after injury. There's some stem cell addition, there's some capacity for regeneration, but by and large it doesn't regenerate on its own. Whereas the peripheral nervous system, if you cut a peripheral nerve, it regrows at a very predictable rate of about 1 millimeter per day.
Interesting.
The exception to that would be cold-blooded vertebrates like fish and frogs. You can basically take out an eye, which is part of the central nervous system, cut the optic nerve, stick in a new eye, and it'll regrow. So the central nervous system of cold-blooded vertebrates regenerates like gangbusters. We don't. Nobody knows why. A lot of programs looking at that. So, you know, one of my main directives is to try and educate the public about what is the basic kind of structure of the nervous system as it matters for them.
Right.
And then also to illustrate some key points about the brain and how it works. So for instance, a lot of people like to think in terms of lizard brain versus more cognitive brain. That's fine. And they like to think in terms of like, okay, the amygdala is fear. One thing I'd really like to get across, I'll just use this opportunity as a point to get across, is that the brain doesn't work that way. The way the brain works is a lot like if a song on a piano, you would never say that one key, say, you know, D flat is the song, just like you wouldn't say that the amygdala is fear. The amygdala is one component of the fear response. It's really a process, not an event. And so
the amygdala is just the mechanism that senses good versus bad. It's like a switch, right?
That's right. So amygdala, probably the best way to describe the amygdala's role is not as a fear station, but one involved in threat detection.
Threat detection, right.
So this is a safe environment, especially with the crowd that's located in this building. But if someone threatening were to walk through the door, we would orient to that and assess it. And the amygdala is going to be activated under those circumstances. But the actual quote unquote fear response is harbored in a different set of structures, things like the stria terminalis. The names don't matter. That's another thing I'm trying to do, is kind of demystify the fact that the naming actually means anything. These are just structures that were named because neuroanatomists stumbled on them and they needed a common language. So I'll try and use as few acronyms as possible. I'll try and use as little mysterious language as possible. So I think that if people understood that every thought, every feeling, every behavior was actually the reflection of dynamics, that is, lots of brain areas becoming activated in sequence, they might, my hope is that they might start to think about their thoughts differently. So, a thought I like to think of as just kind of like a pop-up on, when you don't have a good filter on an internet connection.
Right.
And they really don't have any meaning. It could be spontaneous firing of some key on the piano, so to speak, or some neural structure in the head. So when you start thinking about what should be driving your behavior or decision making, you want to be very selective about what's coming through. And I think that's the kind of mindfulness that's vaguely discussed. Mindfulness we haven't placed a clear definition on mindfulness for the public.
Right.
That's something else I'd like to do. Flow, mindfulness, those are great terms for conversation, but putting a sharper definition on them is important. So the opposite of mindfulness would be mindlessness, and I can't measure that, which doesn't mean it's not a useful term, but I think to me, mindfulness is this ability to realize that your internal dialogue or thoughts, if you will, or feelings, that they have value, but not all their value is created equal. And I think once somebody starts to do that and starts to think about their brain as an organ, which isn't perfect, but it's designed to do certain things and understand
not only is it not perfect, but it's seriously biased.
It's seriously biased. That's right. Then I think you can operate from a place of more control. And anyway, those are two of the major directives. The other one is really about plasticity. I'd love for people to understand better about what the brain's I haven't found a way to say this yet, but I've been searching for one without making it rhyme. But their capacity for plasticity is really immense, but it's very different than the kinds of things that allowed people to shape themselves when they were children. As an adult, you have the ability to script your own neurology and be truly whoever you want to be in terms of personality, behavior, and feelings, but it takes some real work. And the question is, what is that work? And you're obviously developing programs and have developed programs to complete that work. And how does the general population access that?
Right. You brought up so many interesting things. Let me start the last one. So I agree with you 100%. Like, you can create whatever outcome you want, within the reasons of, within the boundaries of your genetics and epigenetics, right? So you can, if you want to completely transform who you are, if you want to learn something radically new, like if I wanted to go master rock climbing, I'm not probably at this age going to climb Half Dome, without ropes, or, you know what I mean?
You might.
Like Alex, maybe, you never know. But the important thing there is to choose wisely, right? Because there's only so much time. And if you choose something that it's not in alignment with something that you're passionate about, or something that, is going to be meaningful to you, then you're wasting your time. And I have this, where I'm going with this is, I have a little bit of problem with the hacking community, even though I'm an investor in Neurohacker, like I know you are, and I'm friends with Dave Asprey. But the hacking community is kind of random. It's just, just do this and do that and do this and do that, and it's going to have some sort of benefit. And that's true. It might be a short-term benefit, it might be a long-term benefit, but it's not really a directed program. And I've always been teaching people that if you want to change your life, transform yourself, then you need to practice. And that practice has a daily methodology to it, right? And it's got to be consistent, it's got to be repetitive, you got to be disciplined with it. And at first it doesn't seem easy, but then slowly it becomes joyful, right? Until all of a sudden you've become that which you've chosen, to be your destiny. And I think the hacking community has missed that, and they're just looking for quick fixes. It's almost like, take this pill.
Yeah,
do this breathing exercise. And some of the, breathing exercise, we'll get into that. I don't want to go down this rabbit hole too much, but some of them can be downright dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know what I mean? And not everyone should be doing Wim Hof or whatever. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I think that, so one thing I've been trying to do in recent years is I've been on what I call sort of a listening tour of what's out there, and trying to place some structure on it in order to make better decisions for myself and the practices that I undertake, and also try and help evolve some of the language and direction around this. I can already sense that we're aligned in this idea that, you have to be considerate of where you're trying to get to and what you're doing. So a distinction that I've come up with recently, and I'm certain I'm not the first to come up with this, but the way I like to think about things is anytime someone's talking about a practice or a tool or a pill or whatever it is, to think about tools for augmenting or changing the mind that are either inside out or outside in. So coffee, as I'm drinking now, is an outside in tool. I want to get a bit of a autonomic arousal lift, so I do something or ingest something. Great. But there are other tools that are inside out, which is I could do, we could do a breathing protocol, or I could just close my eyes and think about something that really excites me, and I can start generating shifts in my nervous system that are equally powerful. Right? Now, neither one is good or bad. It's just a question of when you elect to use one or the other. And I do think, and I'll risk saying that individuals who have a lot of inside out tools and know how to access them in real time are more powerful individuals, because they don't need stuff, and they know they don't need stuff. So if they're drinking coffee, that's great. They can still enjoy that. It's not about being some sort of austere monk, but they know, and I actually would I'd risk saying that, real confidence is knowing that you can handle yourself in a variety of, in spite of circumstances, right? And so it's interesting, I have a couple close friends, as I mentioned, from the teams community, and we don't talk a lot about the work that you guys did. Obviously, you guys don't talk about it for good reason. But I think that what's interesting is that many of them, perhaps all of them, have a tremendous number of inside-out tools at their disposal. I know people outside the teams community that have inside-out tools at their disposal, and they acquire a different kind of approach to life. Also because I think, like in science, the military is deeply steeped in protocol, and the idea that you have to crawl, then walk, then run, right? I'm not going to walk someone in my lab and say, okay, let's publish a paper in Nature. You say, let's come up with a great problem, and let's brainstorm it. And then you iterate through a number of different steps that sometimes goes 3 years. The rewards come very seldom, right? And most people won't even recognize those rewards. So there's some similarities there. But inside out tools, I think, are extremely valuable. Outside in tools are extremely valuable. The biohacking community has been mainly focused on consumer products that are outside in, and they have their place. But I think that ultimately it'll be the people who really think deeply about evolving these inside-out practices, like yourself. I'd like to someday include myself in that camp, but for now I've mainly been trying to figure out what's out there. And there are tremendous tools, as you mentioned, that go back thousands of years. And so that's a key distinction, and it's one that I just like to
I love that.
up.
I would, and we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. The way I look at it is some of these outside-in tools, for the lay person who doesn't have experience with the inside out, or didn't have a Zen master like I did, they're a heck of a great way to begin the process. But if that's all there is, then they can become a crutch. And the problem with that is when the shit happens, which it always does, your crutch isn't going to be there for you. And if you can't activate the mental process internally, then you're kind of lost.
That's a very, very good point. You mentioned something that I'm intrigued by, especially a lot lately, was the idea that I think people assume that big things are going to come from big changes, but I'm starting to pay more attention to the kind of the literature and some of the more evolving research around dopamine reward for small incremental changes. So in addition to believing, and this is just my belief, that people that have a lot of access to inside-out tools are quote unquote more powerful individuals in life, or can steer their life in the directions they want. I also feel that the dopamine reward system can come from external sources, right? People applause, social engagement, those kinds of, all very important. Tribal connection is very important. Social engagement is very important. But there are people who are very good at self-rewarding without announcing it to anybody. And if you can move small steps, if you make small steps in the direction that you want to go, and you self-reward, even just by telling yourself, good job, I'm doing well, I'm not failing, or I'm failing, but I'm going to fail better, whatever language you want to use, the self-reward mechanism is something that I think hasn't been discussed much, and is actually the most powerful mechanism we have to evolve ourselves. Because as you mentioned, when the stress response hits, You know, I always say, you know, every practice is great, but show me how someone handles it when their pulse rate is 150.
Right.
You know, you can meditate all day, but then when you're stuck in the freeway and you get that text message that says something that's really disturbing or troubling or emergency, that's the test, right? And so, and you
it's interesting because one of the first things we do with the SEAL candidates is say you can't regulate your psychology until you regulate your physiology, because the physiology will just send your psychology out of whack. You know what I mean? Right. So that arousal control through the, you know, primarily through breathing, but also through the internal dialogue is critical. And then it's the internal dialogue that gets your mind under control and framed in a positive, you know, that self-reward like you talked about. And then you've started to create the conditions to where you can make better decisions. It's pretty interesting, right? There's a distinct process, right? And so part of the teaching of the public is, you know, you don't go from 0 to hero. You're not going to immediately go from crisis to mindfulness, right? First, we do this to regulate the physiology, to trigger the autonomic nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system. And then we do this to begin to shift from fear to courage, from negative to positive. And then we'll do this to begin to open the space to be able to see things more clearly. And that's that flow state, and to make much better decisions in that crisis. And that can all be trained, which is a beautiful thing. You know, I say we have these skills we call the big four, and we train them. When you train them, it becomes an automatic flow activator. You just start doing the process, boom, 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 and then boom, you're in flow state. It's powerful.
Yeah,
that was a little advertisement there, by the way.
No, it's great. I mean, I think
Unbeatable Mind works.
No, it's great. I mean, it's I think the idea of, you know, breaking down a task into a smaller set of steps is fundamental. You see this across disciplines, right? Whether or not sport or military or elite military or academic. And then, so I guess one thing that I'd like to offer up is this idea that, you know, there's this kind of weird shame around self-rewarding, because we think that people, you know, it's kind of shameful to say, oh, I did such a great job because I, you know, pointed my running shoes in the direction of the door in the morning. But that's actually probably what you should be doing. Right. You don't have to tell anybody. This stuff can all be covert. Well,
it's like McCraven said, make your bed. It feels good.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Applaud yourself.
And it's in the direction you want to go. And so iterating that over and over and over. I always say, you know, people that can convert stress and thought into task completion are remarkable people. And I see this in my laboratory, right? I have a graduate student right now who incidentally is working on fear and courage, and she's remarkable. And she's remarkable in her ability to show up in lab, and regardless of what's going on, to move into task completion and to continue doing that until she has to go off and complete her next task. She has this ability to just kind of set the horizon at whatever she can control, complete that, move to the next thing. And it's funny, she's actually probably the one person in my lab who's not, including me, who's not tethered to a lot of social media and distractions. Nice. And so that might be a component. It might be chicken egg here, so we don't know what's what. But I think that micro rewards, micro finishing lines, and being able to establish those for oneself it's something we're not trained in as young people. Maybe the skateboarding thing, I learned a little bit of that. You try, slam, 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 and then make it, you know? And I do think that a big reward at the end of something, you have to be working in service to or in pursuit of something big. That's the purpose part. But I think in recent years there's been a lot out there, and I'm a big believer in the kind of why stuff and purpose and mission. But we focus so much on that I think we've moved away in this culture around personal evolution from trying to understand how to get more out of the micro increments.
Yeah, right. No,
it could be as simple as just telling yourself inside, good job, and you think, well, that's kind of silly. What is that worth? Well, it's worth what you didn't say in exchange for that. Right. That you're wasting your time or whatever it is. Every positive thought is a replacement, right? And so this isn't just motivational stuff. Your neurology, you can't really attend to more than two things at once. Right. Exactly. So I've always thought, okay, I'm not going to suppress negative thinking. It's never going to work for me. So can I use it as a vessel, right? Sure. You take it for a ride, or it can take you for a ride. And I think that's, we're talking in kind of abstract terms here, but the deeper neurology to support this is in the form of the stress response in reward mechanisms. And these are primitive, hardwired systems in the brains of all animals. And you can imagine, so let's just pretend that we were a small foraging dog-like creature without a whole lot of opportunity to plan past 5-10 minutes or a day. Let's give the dog some benefit. I like dogs. Let's say they could plan for a day. And they're like, all right, I'm at dinner tonight. So that animal is going to start foraging and looking for what it needs. And when it finds it or it gets on a scent, you can absolutely bet that it's going to reward itself, or it will be self-rewarded internally without consciously realizing oh, I'm on the right track. It's not going to say, I'm on the right track, but maybe I'm not going to find what I need. It's going to continue to hone its exploration so that eventually when it arrives at the food or the kill that it needs, or the water that it needs, or the mate that it needs, there's the big payoff in the form of food or mating or a kill or whatever it is that animal cares about. And so the dopamine reward system is kind of getting pulsed all along internally, and then there's the big bolus of reward at the end.
You just described a large percentage of our population, by the way.
Yeah.
Those who are stuck in survival mode, right, around the world.
Right. And it's
not unlike that.
That's right. And there are opportunities for dopamine rewards everywhere in our environment. Right. And so I think even every day, like likes on Instagram, there's nothing sinister about likes on Instagram, but you have to ask yourself, are you foraging?
It's an external micro reward.
That's right.
I was going to ask you about that because there's starting to be a lot of research now on the addictive quality of our devices, whether you're cruising social media on your computer, but most people now on your smartphones. And my son is, got sucked. Fortunately, he didn't grow up with it. He didn't have it until, because he was born in '99, so he didn't have it until he was like 8 or 9. So I think his brain had some grounding in, that alternate universe that you and I grew up in. But now he's completely stuck on the damn thing.
Yeah. So Steve Jobs, who was local to me growing up, used to talk about, why he would wear the same clothes every day, right? It was because he felt like he had a limited number of sort of decision-making units. And so that just kind of took care of that. Maybe that's true, maybe it's not, but that's what he said. It makes sense to me. I think I'd like to suggest the idea that we have a limited number of focus units per day as well. So the ability to kind of set a goal and then accomplish that goal and then move the horizon to a new goal is something that we do visually. So 40% of our brain as humans is visual. And the visual system, every time what we call
Does that include visualization?
That includes visualization and kind of associative areas.
I got it. Okay. So imagery and the be able to build processing external images through our eyes plus internal imaging.
Right. And all the sorts of things that are happening subconsciously, like emotions of others and kind of conditions or spatial units, like what the layout of this room is something that my brain has made sense of without me consciously really thinking about too much. So we're such visually driven animals. And so every time you orient, or what we call foveate, where you take the fovea, which is the high acuity area of your eyes, and you move them to a particular location in space, there's an arousal that's associated with that, an autonomic arousal or vigilance. And there's some cost to that. It's not bad. I don't say cost in that it's depleting you, but there are a fixed number of units. It's energy, and you don't think about it because it's very low. It's like the penny slots, right? You're just kind of dumping pennies in. You do that long enough, and you're going to be out of your ration of money. And so you have your ration of energy units, but the ability to do this is actually fundamental to all animals' evolution and survival. So if you look at a lion, for instance, most of the time they lay around during the day. They're in a very parasympathetic state, and their gaze is not fixated on anything in particular. They're licking themselves, they're sleeping, now at some point during the day or week, they decide to hunt. And at that point, everything changes about their physiology. And they start to anchor their vision in what's called a vergence eye movement, where their eyes now move together. They foveate to a particular location in space. And now they have to make some very careful space-time assessments about how fast animals are moving, how fast they're moving, their degree of camouflage. They're using theory of mind to think, how visible am I by that other animal? So they're now thinking for the other animal, a very intense set of operations. Then they go out, they hopefully get their kill, they eat, and then they go back to this parasympathetic state. Humans, on the other hand, even though we have this ability to transition between these more panoramic vision type relaxed modes and foveated goal direction modes, the phone in particular, but all day long, we're in these foveated, attention-consuming modes. And this is something my lab is actually working on. In contrast to the lion, there are animals, all grazing animals, which essentially just graze for grass. They have panoramic vision to detect predators if they were to show up. But an animal like a cow or a sheep or a goat is essentially a lawnmower. I don't want to take away from their, with a heartbeat. I mean, I don't want to take away from their other, wonderful components. I love animals of all kinds, but they're grazing, and all they have to worry about is if there's a threat. They're so placid that if one of the members of their species is picked off by us or by a lion, they go right back to grazing. They're not traumatized.
Interesting.
And they're so plastic, and they're always in panoramic vision. And so one thing we've been experimenting with in the lab is the extent to which being in panoramic mode allows you to relax your autonomic nervous system very quickly. And when you're in foveated modes, you're in kind of a vigilance state. And so the phone it's a new invention for humankind in which, rather than driving and listening to music and going into panoramic vision, which is what happens when you drive, you're working purely on peripheral vision, which incidentally is faster processing. You can detect things coming in much faster.
More information.
Boxers and learn to relax and not get fixated on the guy's shoulder or the guy's feet or the guy's chest or anything, because you can actually start to see things coming in kind of an arc-like motion. You shift into what's called the magnocellular system, which is much faster, bigger pipes, faster communication, more or less in the nervous system, bigger axons, faster electrical communication. When I foveate, I'm looking at details. I'm starting to process. It's very costly. And the phone and reading your phone is, I believe, and we're going to have data on this soon, so this is still kind of in the mode of hypothesis and speculation, but the phone is draining your attentional resources every time you look at it and read. And we didn't evolve to do this, which is not to say that it's bad, but some people have a lot more attentional capacity than others. Now, the thing that resets this, your kind of attentional units is very clear, and that's sleep. And what's interesting about sleep is during sleep, not only is there plasticity and learning, but sleep is the one time in which your space-time relationships are completely untethered. If we were in a dream right now and one of your old SEAL team buddies walked in through the door and then my dog walked in, we could have a conversation about that. It wouldn't be weird. It's like a psychedelic trip in real time. But it's this space-time fluidity. There's something about sleep that allows us to anchor our ability to set goals, micro-increment, micro-reward, work toward purpose. And I find it very interesting that so much of the early SEAL team screening process is, yes, it's physical, right? But from what I understand, and I've never gone through it or been there, but there are guys who show up who can do an immense number of pull-ups, push-ups. These are physical specimens that are way beyond the norm or the mean. But ultimately, what starts to cull people, and there are multiple things that cull people from my understanding, is sleep deprivations, where you take a normal functioning human being and they fall apart. And so a lot of what you're screening for in a process like that is who can maintain this ability to set a horizon, move toward it, complete, then go into panoramic vision, figure out what's required of me, find a new fixation point, complete. You're just describing the life process in kind of a microcosm.
Yeah, I love that.
And whereas if you're only in panoramic mode, you're never going to survive because you're never going to set a goal and go. This is the chill out phenomenon. It's great, but you have to balance that with the hyper focus. So it's the ability to tether, or toggle rather, back and forth between hyper focus and panoramic life, if you will, that really I think makes people effective or hyper effective. I love that. And I think it can be trained up. And I think the training, I think the screening process selects for people that have a kind of natural ability for that. But as your training program, suggests, and the higher numbers of people that get through, it's something that can be learned. And I'm very interested at how neuroscience can help contribute to not only that for purposes of military, but also for the general public, because I think that people don't suffer from lack of motivation necessarily. I think it's just that their energy is just poorly distributed.
Yeah, and research on willpower is basically saying that as well. As you make decisions during the day, your willpower, and basically what they're saying is the energy that your brain is using is tiring you out, and you make poor decisions toward the end of the day.
So every time I look at my phone, I try and ask myself, am I gaining something or giving something up? Maybe it's neutral. And the phone is here to stay. I mean, it's
for sure. It's just how we interact with it, right? I'm like you. I'm trying to reorganize my life around how often do I even need to bring this with me? You know what I mean? So much, it can do so much that we've allowed it to do that stuff that now we need it all day long because it's our banking, it's our email, it's our texting, it's this and phone. So maybe we need to untether some of those things and just leave the phone at home so it doesn't distract us and degrade our performance. I didn't want to mention that in my book, The Way of the SEAL, I have a whole section on training relaxed gaze and focused gaze. And I relate the story of, a SEAL patrol, this patrolling along in the dark toward a target, and they're all in relaxed gaze. There's just soft, and especially at night, obviously you have to use your peripheral vision. Peripheral vision is relaxed gaze. Night walking is relaxed gaze. And it's just basically attention is turned inward, the energy is flowing inward, sucking in information. Like you said, I love the language you use, of processing very fast. And the imprints are looking for patterns. So your brain is looking for patterns. And for the SEAL, those patterns are recognizable until they're not. And as soon as they're not, and that could be, a twig snapping over here or a sound of a round being chambered, then they snap immediately into focus gaze, right? Which you called foveal. I love that. Why do we always have to come up with weird words for things in the medical community? Like, why can't we just call it focus?
I think the early, what's interesting, things are named mainly on structure, not what the structure does, which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
I think there's a great opportunity to evolve the nomenclature around neuroscience in the years to come. I'd like to be a part of that insofar as it serves the audience, right?
Right.
Because neuroscientists, being able to talk to other neuroscientists is useful, but the general public, also given that taxpayer dollars paid
pick up a book on
right.
neuroscience.
That's right.
They're like, I don't understand this.
That's right. And I think changing the language is something that is important, or making it
right.
accessible. Yeah.
That's interesting. I love that. I love that. And it can be trained. You don't have to join the SEAL teams to train focus and relaxed gaze. And there's great benefit. Think about, like, as a leader, being able to really zero in on a task or, another person's, issues to help them, but then to be able to, like, scan and just start to feel into what's happening. Let's say you're in a board meeting or you're giving a speech even. I mean, you can go back and forth, shifting.
Yeah, I find I get a lot of questions about neuroscience and interfacing with the public, and one of the ones I get more often than not is, what do I think about this idea that there are hidden capacities within us, right? I think for some reason we're intrigued by stories like, oh, this person has a stroke and then they could play the piano, or like, and I think one of the great capacities that we all harbor in us, and a lot of people have access to these, but many more haven't, is this ability to set a goal on a micro scale, accomplish that goal, and move to the next thing. It's just it hurts a little bit. I think, and I'm not the first to say this, but things like confusion and strain and effort, that's actually your brain trying out different configurations of firing to see what works. It's not supposed to feel good.
It's
and, so
yeah.
I think as a culture, there's more and more, certainly in the fitness culture, there's this idea that kind of growth is at the edge. It's in those final reps. It's in those final miles or steps that you really grow. But I think the same is true for mental operations. I love the idea of a flow state and moving into things where things are seamless and fast and wonderful. But I can honestly say, some of the hardest mental work I've ever done then is the work that then 2 days later you get the insight or you get the understanding. I think most people don't like that feeling, and yet we all crave growth. And so I think looking at the stress process as a point of growth is something that I think is starting to take hold more. On the idea of stress, I just was reminded to think, that there's sort of, I sometimes joke about the wellness community, not to poke fun at it, but to kind of prompt its evolution. And what I mean by that, so I feel like there's kind of three major approaches to stress. One is it can hijack you. Nobody wants that. So there are no books out there on how to get hijacked by stress more often. That's not what anyone wants. We all seem to be decent enough at that naturally.
An opportunity.
That's an opportunity, right? And then there's the opportunity to learn how to tamp down stress, and that's where most of the literature and information is out there right now. Learning how to control the stress response. I think that there's value in that. And then there's this third category, which I call adaptive apathy, which is the learning how to not care, which is a different approach, but probably not a good one. But then there's this fourth category that I'm very intrigued by. I have a feeling you're in this category, and it's a much rarer one, which are the people who have realized that with stress, there's an opportunity to excel beyond their existing capacity. Right. That there comes a point in which not stressing is not an option, because the stress response is actually something to grab onto and ride to higher levels of performance.
Stress itself is just stress. You have eustress and you have distress. We want to get away from distress, and we want to get toward eustress, which is the type of stress where you control the response to it, and you use it, like you said, to bring you to a higher state of awareness or growth or experience. So I think you're right. That's one of our key trainings. Is stress itself is just, it is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
There's always going to be something that can trigger stress.
Mm-hmm.
And it's your response to that, whether you use that for growth or, to go a little bit deeper into something, or do you shy from it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think
human beings, we grow through challenge. We have to experience a little bit of suffering.
Mm-hmm.
If we don't, then we experience a lot of suffering by, letting the world just have its way with us.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the kind of passivity that comes from just constantly seeking pleasure is really kind of, it's insidious, and then it inevitably leads people to be unhappy.
That's right.
Whereas and so we're talking kind of in coarse terms about, I've been very struck by the extent to which physical practices, at least in my life and in a lot of my observation, has been the best entry point
for sure
to mental practices.
Yeah, I think so.
And there's one reason I like talking to the fitness and some people in the military community, is that they've already embraced the idea that they're trying to get better, and they're looking for things to get better.
Right.
Now, this ability to kind of set goals, micro reward, and head towards greater rewards is the formula for plasticity. It is what the brain needs to do for any species in order to know how to get wins in the future.
Right.
And I think that most people, if you're lucky enough to grow up with a little bit of hardship and things mostly okay, or even a lot of hardship, you get to the point in life where if you survive your teens and 20s, where you get very good at doing that in a very restricted and narrow corridor of challenges. And this I see across all domains. I see it in, and there are exceptions, of course, but I see it in people in military, civilians, business people, men, women, doesn't matter, right? Myself included. I'm not unique in this regard, is that we get very good at learning how to do certain things well, and a lot of things so-so. What's intriguing to me is that the process that can be used to learn lots of other things is actually, or any other thing rather, or get good at something or setting new purpose, is exactly the same. It's this idea of defining the end goal, and if you don't know, at least having enough trust that you're moving in the proper direction. Right. And then this what I'm calling micro rewards, right. Micro self-rewards leading to some bigger, larger reward. And what's interesting is that the kind of failures of a lot of people, there's some very public figures right now that I won't name, that you look at how could they be so effective in one domain of life and such a colossal failure in another, or so colossally bizarre in another. And I think it's because this process, we're a lot like other animals, where we get very good at one or two things and not good at a lot of other things. Right. But our human capacity lets us be good at a lot of things. So what I love about the kinds of programs that you've developed, and that I think are getting extracted from a number of different sources, and hopefully will be formalized for the general public. I think they should be teaching this stuff in schools. If I had known this stuff when I was in elementary school, or when the brain is exceptionally plastic, that we can actually learn a process, a set of operations. Just like learning chin-ups, there's some skill to learning pull-ups or chin-ups, but really the more important thing is not about pulling yourself above the bar to be able to do that over and over. It's about, well, can you climb a tree with that? Okay, can you understand something about physical effort that can then be translated to running, or translated to reading? Can you start to look at the commonalities between those things? And it almost sounds kind of trivial, but in the end, it's the core operations of the brain that are important. So a lot's been made of recently about connectomes, like this connects to that. There are trillions of neurons. The more important thing to understand about the brain is it works in algorithms. There are mathematical formulas, which we don't yet understand as a field, that the brain computes about space and time and self and other and empathy, which are immensely complicated, but they translate across domains so that you can go in, especially with your training, into an environment and assess that environment whether or not, regardless of who the players are, and make adaptive decisions about it. That's an algorithm. And so what I said earlier about, I think that's the sense of self-assuredness and confidence that people want. The more narrow your abilities are, the more scared you should be about how you're going to function in life.
I agree.
Right? And yet we've sort of trained ourselves not just to be distracted by technology, but we tend to be hyper-productive in other areas. So to me, the most dangerous situation is to be hyper-productive, income earning, and kind of good at one thing, and then broadly distracted and kind of a lot of noise and chatter about everything else, because that to me is a very, very poorly directed life.
Yeah, I agree.
You need that component of success, but then at some point to realize yourself, I think, and I think we're missing out on a lot of potential in the world because we haven't learned what the core operations are. And I don't claim to know them, but I think they have something to do with understanding how one as an individual, through self-reflection, sets goals, what holds them back. I've spent half a day thinking about my own procrastination, which sounds kind of like an academic idiot's
thinking about
nightmare thing.
Right?
But actually, by the end of that day, I had a short list of the things that kind of limit my ability to move forward, and a small list of things that allow me to move forward, and gradually was able to kind of unvault myself from that. So yeah, I don't think there's any replacement for hard mental work. The good news is it doesn't last that long. Right. Anyway, that was a little bit of a riff, but I wanted to make sure that
to pick up on that riff, we talk a lot about integration. And so, you know, my philosophy is that the human being is a body, mind, spirit system, right? It's a very complex system and a lot of things going on, a lot of algorithms going on, but you can't divorce them ultimately. And this is what we've done in our society. You know, we do a little physical training. We used to do it through PE. Now we don't. So some people are fortunate because they have some aptitude in that area, and then they get into sports and whatever, and they experience the benefits. But a lot of, large swath of society doesn't. So then they get disconnected from the body. Well, that removes at least 1/3 of the equation right there. We teach, we get strong cognitively and intellectually through our academic process, but even that's incomplete because we're not training the whole mind, the whole brain. And we're certainly not training the heart mind, the belly mind. We're not training as an integrated whole. We're just talking about memory and consuming information, which really limits us. So that means the second part, which we're actually strong in, is incomplete. And then the third part, spirituality or spiritual strength or working with chi or energy or, life force, through breathing practices, through meditation, through visualization, through spiritual practices, which are human practices, have been stripped out of that. And we've been led to believe that spirituality is basically, do I go to church and am I a good person? It's the moral aspect, the moral side and the structural side. So that third aspect of being human has been stripped of the most powerful components. So in order to solve this problem, we have to reintegrate. In order to reintegrate, we have to look at the human being as a whole body, mind, spirit system. So the way we do that is to say, okay, there's a physical component, there's the mental component, there's the emotional component, which is actually part of the mental, but we want to separate it to get people to understand it better. Then there's the intuitional component, which is like the real subtle aspect of your mind, learning to really experience what the messages of your gut and your biome and the enteric nervous system and the vagal system, what's that telling you? What's the information mean? How do we process it? Is, our belly and our heart don't speak to us in, symbolic language. It speaks to us through imagery. It speaks to us through sensations, through feelings, gut reactions, and whatnot. And then the last part, we don't use the term spiritual because I don't want people to confuse it with religion, but how do we find deep purpose and connect to our whole mind? So the fifth is really more of an outcome as well as some practices. And so if you start to, if anyone listens to this, they probably heard me talk about the 5 mountains. You start to practice every one of these, or you have disciplines around each one of these 5 mountains, and then you do them together every day. So your workout becomes a 5-mountain training plan, right? Where you link a very important purpose to the training. You begin the training by with a breath practice, which is going to breath is the bridge between all three of these, the body, mind, and spirit. So the breath is it's going to train your physiology, balance your physiology. It's going to get you clear in your mind and start training you to what I call the perceiving mind as opposed to the cognitive mind. And it's going to connect you to the deep wellspring of energy that lies, okay, good, now we're getting somewhere. Now we visualize the workout, which is beginning to train the intuitive mind, right? And we anchor our workout to the emotional outcomes that we want, right? Success, greater physical health, looking better in our bathing suit, in the summer, all that kind of stuff. And in that way, we can take a simple thing, which used to be just going to the gym, and turn it into a transformative practice, an integrated transformative practice. And over time, what happens is physical improves, the mental improves, the emotional improves, the intuitive improves, the Kokoro heart, mind, and action, spiritual line improve. And instead of being gravely dysfunctional human beings where we're strong in one and weak on all the others, like you described, we start to level up. And then all these start to, your whole body-mind system starts to work in a much more evolved and refined fashion, which is experienced as better decisions, more peace of mind, contentment, overall systemic health. I mean, it's just so simple, yet so profound. You know,
yeah, it's really,
and it's hard to study for a scientist. It's hard to break it down and study
Right.
because there's so much going on there.
Yeah, there's a lot going on there. Yeah, you know, I'm struck by how it's part of a. These are things that are accessible on a daily level.
Right.
You know, I was born and raised and live in the land of retreats. Right, we have amazing places, places where people can leave, and these exist elsewhere too. Right, where you can leave for 2 weeks and get total decompress.
Love that.
So the whole notion of doing, you know, of working like crazy and then resting like crazy, to me just seems nuts. It just, to me, that the much more sane and useful practices are going to be the ones that you can implement daily. And you just described how, you know, you can incorporate the mental into the physical and even some other components as well. I think that, you know, there isn't a lot of, if I have one wish, it would be that just as we have physical education classes, or at least they used to, in elementary school and high school and middle school, that some scientifically grounded self-reflection, self-directed plasticity tools would be taught in schools, because then you would essentially generate an entirely new cohort of people that had an awareness. I think it's starting, and I think that will happen. I think that, if I may, there's a concept which, as you were telling me this, it kind of comes up. I don't think that there's any specific lab result that we can tie to the kind of holistic practices that you guys have developed. But one thing that's interesting is when you start to think about the human capacity, the human brain's capacity to set notions of time. So when we talk about purpose, or you know, a goal, or what's the meaning of life, or what you're really doing is you're starting to dilate and contract your notion of time. Right. So in sleep, space and time are totally fluid. Right. Anything can happen, right? Abe Lincoln can walk in the room and you won't think it's strange. And the way I think about the mind is the following. Imagine a kind of a glass sphere, and that's you. And I believe that you're always, to some extent, focused on your own self. And then there's another sphere, which is your second point of focus. And I believe that it's very hard to have more than 2 points of focus. I think I don't think we can have 3 points of focus. And that second point of focus, maybe you can, but for sake of discussion, you know, a second point of focus, like the coffee mug, or you, or our environment, or we can focus on something totally different, like a concept, or the future or the past. And those two things are tethered to one another, because my physiology is going to react to whatever it is that I visualize and see. Now that tether can be set at whatever distance I want. So you and I, if we really wanted it, would be meaningless, but we could set the tethers that we're both concentrating on the number of dots on this coffee cup and counting them and creating meaning on them, et cetera. While we're doing that, we're not thinking outside the space. We're in the immediate space-time environment, and we're anchored to it. That kind of process is very important for task implementation. Right. If I want to do something, I need to be very focused. I think you described this in your book as the front sight focus. Right? Did I get that right? And you have to be very focused on the task at hand and that horizon point. But then at some point, in order to be effective, you have to be able to loosen that tether, dilate out your focus, and then pick the next point to orient to. I'm repeating a little bit of what I said earlier, but that ability to reset the tether and then focus on an additional focus point is extremely important now in being a functional human being. Now, if I dilate out my concept of, the reason this has to do with time is the moment that I make that focus outside our immediate environment, the brain is starting to think about contingencies in a different kind of time reference, like what's the scope of my life? Where's my meaning come from? Those are great thoughts to have, but if you become anchored in those thoughts too long, you'll never actually complete the things that are required in order to go anywhere. Just as if I'm too focused on what's right in front of me, I'll never actually stay in touch. I won't stay in touch with the bigger picture. And so the kind of, as you described these practices that you've developed, what I'm struck by is that the workout, if you will, that you described is incorporating a lot of different time reference elements. So the breathing I always think of as kind of the second hand on our life. You know, you concentrate, it brings you into the here and now. Being in the here and now is great, unless you're depressed.
The here
in which
and now
case,
is timeless, by the way.
it's timeless.
Right.
That's
Until
right.
you get back into your cognitive mind, the cognitive mind is always going to be linear, right? So that's, you're going to have the sense of past and future. The presence is, you know, like you said, the breath can bring you into the present moment. And being radically focused in the present moment, it's hard to think, because thinking gets us back into time.
That's right.
That's fascinating. Right. But you can still be, if you've trained, you know, this is, kind of brings up what we were talking before we started. If you've trained your body relentlessly, then your body is able to spontaneously act in the present moment without the cognitive capacity being switched on. Do you agree with that?
I completely agree. I think that,
which is where you get the flow.
That's right. And so I think that, you know, setting these points of focus at any one location is not really the key. The key is you want to be in dynamic control of the tether. What I mean by that is the human being who can move their point of focus at will and sometimes focused on self, sometimes focused on outside, sometimes connected to both simultaneously, and constantly thinking about where they're placing their focus, or even letting the tether go. I like the concept of micro recovery. As I walk between buildings and meetings, I intentionally let the tether go.
Right.
Because if I'm looking at my phone or I'm thinking about what I'm going to do in the meeting, I'm missing out on the opportunity to kind of micro recover and be better prepared when I show up. Whereas everyone says, like,
we teach that in a workout. You put the kettlebell down, you're not thinking, you're not planning, you're not you just soften your gaze, start breathing through your nose. Right. And even, you know, just 1 or 2 seconds, you can have a lot more recovery mentally and emotionally and, you know, physically.
And so I think
powerful. I agree with that.
Yeah. And so I guess this is all to say that, you know, if there's a takeaway protocol that maybe the listeners or the viewers would like to think about, it would be starting to cultivate their own internal practice around where is their focus in terms of, and how effective are they at moving that focus from the inside out, right? And I feel like we set up a lot of our life conditions around trying to do this well without realizing what we're doing. We try and get a good night's sleep so that we can do this well. We try and eat right and consume caffeine in the proper ratio so that we can do this well. And all that's fine and good. But what I love about the practices that you've developed, and that other, you know, I guess some of that probably comes from the work in the teams and other communities, that it's really about taking internal control of that process. And I would almost say, layer that onto a little bit of what we were discussing earlier, which is every time you can do that, even for a moment, to reward yourself in the form of a I don't know, self-satisfaction, you know, a thought, where that means you are navigating in the most adaptive way through life. It doesn't mean you're cut off and strictly goal-oriented and non-empathic. The opposite. Sometimes in conversation, the best thing to be is empathic. Other times it's just to listen, right? So I'm very struck by all the language that's been used in the psychology and wellness culture to describe things that I think are very useful. The question is when and how and what's the algorithm. So I was always struck by these sayings like, absence makes the heart grow fonder. Yeah, well, I've also heard out of sight, out of mind. So which one is it? It's both, right? It's the ability to move through grief by focusing on something else, and it's the ability to move through grief by feeling grief intensely.
That's right.
The question is, can you toggle back and forth as necessary to be an effective human being? And so you look, there are entire books, there are entire programs, there are retreats, there are whole concepts built around doing one or the other. Right. And I love the integrative process that you've developed here, because it's really about that dynamic control and, you know, what it takes to be effective in essentially any mental or physical environment. And awesome. So that's what I mean when I talk about an algorithm, as opposed to a set of protocols. But of course, you ultimately, you know, the listeners might be thinking, okay, that's all sounds fine, but how do I do it? Okay, so your programs would be one example, or learning better concentration is one, but also learning how to let go of concentration and learning how to relax on demand is another. And that's something that can be practiced and cultivated. The brain was designed to do this. We evolved the machinery, and it's embedded in us. and it was designed for a good purpose. It's just that most animals are perfectly fine with a couple core operations, and they're good.
Yeah.
You know, my bulldog Costello, you know, I take care of the rest. He doesn't have to worry about it.
Right.
Whereas we worry constantly, and that worry, I think, was designed to get us to try and optimize. The problem is we're not optimizing.
Right.
In any event.
I love it. So you've heard of the OODA loop?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Boyd, who was a fighter pilot, you know, developed the concept. Super simple concept, but it's describing what you're talking about. And I don't know if a lot of people are aware of that, but the OODA loop is observe, orient, decide, act. But the observe and orient is internal. Like, it's internal control, it's spatial awareness, it's relaxed gaze, it's seeing what happens in the four-dimensional space around you as a result of either the action you took or what's happening around you, the stress input, right? Mm-hmm. And then orienting yourself to that mentally. Right now, in martial arts, it might be some sort of movement or centering or grounding that's happening. If you're in like a fight or something, or for aerial combat, it might be positioning the airplane slightly differently. But then the third is decide, right? And this is where you're clicking back into focus, and you're just saying, okay, based upon my observation and the orientation, this is the next decision. This is the next micro goal, and then you take the action, and then you immediately soften back into the observation orientation.
And I think that's the thing that rarely gets discussed. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I think people think, okay, you complete this 4-step operation, and then
what's
it's like,
the next step?
And then you just go, like, grab on and go. And it's like, no, it's the ability to reset. Maybe we can add another thing to the OODA loop, although I want to, you know, give credit where credit's due. But the resetting back to the point where you can observe.
Yeah.
That's what I think is so fundamental, and what's missing for so many people is they say, okay, I set this goal and I do this thing, and then it's kind of like, we always say, like in martial arts, you know, like, don't wait for the camera shot. Like, you have to pull your punch back and move and start to observe again. Otherwise, you're gonna get clipped.
I like to the way I teach this in Unbeatable Mind is, you imagine an infinity loop, and the left side is the realm of potential, and potential is all the stuff we're talking about. It's all that happens on the inside, right? A human being's potential is created, fostered, developed, engineered through those algorithms of how the mind works and how your mind-body system is working. And then the other side of the infinity loop is performance, which is all external. So the whole realm of peak performance and leadership development, and it's all looking at the left side, or, you know, depending on your orientation, the right side, that performance side. But no performance or all performance is affected by the potential that's generated by the individual or the team on the other side of the loop. And they meet at a very distinct center point, right? And if you get the better you get at training, shifting between potential and performance, the tighter that infinity loop gets until it becomes a pinpoint. And it's happening simultaneously. And here's a theory that I have, and this is something that would be probably impossible to validate. But I believe that the human being can get to a point where they can be acting and recovering simultaneously, where that potential and performance are happening on parallel tracks. Not to say that you don't still need to just do the recovery and the reflection and the whatnot, and just act forcefully. But ultimately, when it comes to performing at our highest level, it's a simultaneous process.
Yeah, when the operations that we're talking about, so I guess I love this infinity loop notion because it's repetitive. That's
right.
And I really appreciate the OODA loop, and it's saved lives, right? The OODA loop is extremely valuable, but the reset of the OODA loop is really, it's what's kind of missing in the OODA loop description as originally described. So I think that when that process is fast enough, I think when that algorithm is being carried out over and over fast enough, I can see how it could start to feel like and actually become a unified operation. So these are all neural circuits. Like, these are brain areas that are being activated in sequence. And just like learning how to hit a tennis ball with a tennis racket, which I frankly don't know how to do well, the first times I do it, I'm going to have, you know, the trajectories and the arcs are going to be different each time, and eventually I'll get it right. And so learning how to iterate this more quickly and in different environments is really the key to training, and I think that's the
and there is no hack for that.
And there is no hack for that. So neuroplasticity, you know, as a child, you can absorb information like a sponge. right? The window for plasticity up until about 20 years old is remarkable. And you learn things passively, words, language, all sorts of things, contingencies, emotional relationships, etc. At some point, adult plasticity requirements kick in. And the requirements for adult plasticity are very precise focus and attention. And this is played out through the cholinergic system that emerges from the brainstem. It's like a fire hose of acetylcholine on a set of synapses that are active around some contingency. Like if we gave some meaning to some event and we're really going to focus on it, and the outcomes are important, you're starting to shape neural circuitry around that set of operations because there's a lot of acetylcholine being dumped at that location. Attention and acetylcholine are one and the same.
So do you think, can I ask a question
yeah.
here? Do you think that it's possible to train your mind to have the plasticity of a child again when you're an adult, or is it structurally
I love this
set?
question. It's really interesting. So,
because the concept of beginner's mind comes to my mind.
To some degree. I mean, there are neural circuits that, fortunately, like the ones that govern your heart rate, et cetera, that are hardwired. They can be modulated, but you wake up every day with your heart beating as a result of these hardwired circuitries. You're not going to modify those. It is very easy, unfortunately or fortunately, for survival purposes, to wire in new fears and traumatic type stuff. Fortunately, we have a storytelling part of our brain that can reframe those and leverage those. I know you had Goggins on here recently. Like I've had the fortunate experience of working with him for a little bit. We were on a consulting project together, and he is every bit as intense as he comes across in public. He's remarkable. His intensity is remarkable.
He could use a little recovery time, though.
I doubt he would agree. I doubt he would agree. I'm not going to speak for him, but I doubt
worried about him just burning out.
I don't know if burnout's in his capacity.
He would say it's better to burn out than to fade away.
Exactly. He's remarkable, but I think that there's so the ability to enter in new traumatic experiences is always going to be there, but there is this idea. So there's never been an example that I'm aware of a human mutant that is hyperplastic their entire life. Someone who could learn as well as they could as when they were a child. And so it's unlikely to be a single gene or a single brain area or something like that. If it were, we probably would have seen the mutation, and this hyper learning person would have been talked about or known. However, there are certain individuals that have been discussed throughout history who have maintained an intense or a recognizable ability to change and evolve themselves in ways. Now, the one that comes to mind is the one that I learned about as a child because I grew up in a family with a scientist for a father. We didn't talk about who won the Super Bowl. We talked about who won the Nobel Prize. And so Richard Feynman, the famous Dick Feynman, was always discussed. My dad, knew him, wasn't close with him, but I heard a lot about him growing up. He was remarkable. He taught himself how to draw in his 60s, slowly, mind you. It's not like he learned overnight. And he was into flotation tanks, and he had his Nobels. Most people don't even know what he did for his Nobel. I barely understand it. I think it was quantum electrodynamics or something, which I definitely don't understand. But what's remarkable about Feynman, to me, is his notion of curiosity and play. So I've spent some time recently thinking about, let's put a more pointed definition on what those are and why they might be useful. So curiosity to me is when you're very eager or excited to know the outcome, but you are truly unattached to the outcome.
Right.
You want to know, but you don't even know what you want to know. Otherwise, it's not curiosity. Otherwise, it's something else. Right. Curiosity about the outcome real curiosity tends to anchor your attention and leverage the neuromodulator systems like acetylcholine and dopamine that open plasticity. Likewise, play is this, if you do it appropriately, meaning with high effort, but just below that kind of stress threshold where you feel committed to the outcome. And you can play competitively, but play and curiosity, I think, are close cousins in the brain. And when I say that, I mean that I think the core algorithms and the neuromodulator systems that are involved, I think are gonna be the same. Now, when I say neurotransmitters are the things that, the glutamate and GABA they're sort of what allow neurons to have a conversation, kind of like we're having a conversation. Neuromodulators like acetylcholine, dopamine, serotonin, they're like the volume on the microphones.
Interesting. Yeah.
They adjust the volume of certain conversations. So imagine a room where there are a lot of conversations. That's your brain, okay? But neuromodulator systems are like someone coming along, like your sound and video tech, coming along and putting a microphone between two people, and all of a sudden that conversation becomes the dominant one in the room. That's how plasticity works. And if that conversation carries on long enough, and there's the microphone, so to speak, the acetylcholine or dopamine system is there, those synapses will last. That will be recorded and kind of indelibly marked in for posterity. Now, what it means is that the child brain is probably bathing in these neuromodulators, but as adults, they become less available. And this actually might be where it's nootropics actually become a reasonable conversation. I know we both invested in Quality in the Neurohacker Collective early on. I did that because I was very excited about the nootropic space. I don't think it's for everybody, frankly.
For the listener, nootropic is a brain supplement.
Yeah, right, a brain augmentation supplement. Right. But I've long been interested in this space because I don't think it's a replacement for other sorts of tools, but I think
like food
or sleep,
fat and ketones,
or sleep, right, or focus, or you're right, exactly. And I did a little bit of commentary on some of the dangers of nootropics, as well as some of the benefits that was in the BBC recently. You can just Google it, BBC nootropics or smart drugs, and I think you'll find those. And so there's a lot of information out there and considerations, but I think that the most interesting ones, and I think Quality of Mind was the one that I'm got excited about, which is why I invested, which is that they tend to augment the cholinergic system. Now, the cholinergic system is fundamental to memory. It's fundamental to memory formation and to focus, and it's a system that can be pharmacologically tapped into. I think one has to be cautious in how they do it. The traditional way of doing this was tobacco.
No kidding.
One of the strongest ways to release nicotinic receptors. There are two kinds of receptors for acetylcholine, nicotinic and muscarinic. Nicotinic ones are the ones that respond to things like nicotine, which increase acetylcholine. So many writers and artists, it was a hard trade-off when they realized it's either lung cancer or my ability to focus, right?
So that's that which kills you makes you mentally stronger.
That's right.
A new, new paradigm.
I like that. So, thinking about ways to get, some people I know, some very famous neuroscientists I know, whose names I won't mention, chew Nicorette, not just as a replacement for their cigarette, but it's to enhance their ability to focus. I'm not going to claim any double-blind placebo.
In the nootropics, is there anything that has that quality like nicotine, or is some of the substrates of nicotine in the nootropic?
Yes, so some of the cholinergic donors that are in Quality of Mind and other nootropics, for instance, will do that.
Interesting.
And so I think that's where people say, oh, it's just caffeine. I don't think it's just caffeine. I think that the acetylcholine system is key there. A lot of nootropics have mecunopurines, which is pharmaceutical grade L-DOPA. Now, I have mixed feelings about that because I think the
like exogenous dopamine.
When you're taking L-DOPA basically, right. and I'm not saying that's necessarily bad. Everyone has to talk to their doctor, et cetera. I'm not a physician. I always say I'm not a physician, so I don't prescribe anything. I'm a professor, so I profess lots of things. You have to decide if they're valuable or not, and if you want to do them or not. But I think that the dopaminergic system is one that is so powerful, right? Because this is what evolution embedded in us in order to get us to continue to do certain behaviors. Whereas the acetylcholine system is the one that's hard to access. Guys like you, highly, and for that matter, highly trained musicians or academics or people that have a very pointed focus in life are very good at attaching their cholinergic system to a set of operations. What's really interesting about the practices that you were describing earlier that you've built around the SEALFIT Academy is that they're designed to be exportable. I have to assume that although you might want people to come back from time to time for refreshers, it's not really about what happens here. It's about what they take into the outside world.
What they take away and begin to use daily. Right.
So you're training algorithms, and the ability to learn those algorithms is intimately tied to these cholinergic systems. So attention and acetylcholine go hand in hand. Curiosity and play, I think, are the doorways through which most people are going to access learning because they're fun. They kind of feel non-pressured, and yet the growth is going to come at the point in which something becomes difficult. So I love the concept
of gamification of like language training, like Duolingo is really powerful.
If it's fun. I mean, people, what we know based on everything from nutrition science, everything is, a very well-known nutrition scientist colleague of mine recently said, it doesn't matter how much science and nutrition comes out, people are going to go ultimately for convenience. And I personally disagree. I think that as a culture, we're starting to become more in tune with long-term health goals. And so likewise with the mind, I think we need to be, we have to lock ourselves in a box or go to Walden Pond or something ridiculous like that, because that's not feasible in this day and age. But to start to think about, you know, where is my sense of play and curiosity coming from? What am I really curious about? What do I want to know? What do I want to cultivate? And then how am I going to do that? And I think in doing that, you start to open up that window for plasticity. So you asked, do we have that ability throughout life? And I think, yes, you just have to kind of get more of a crowbar into the door right. as opposed to it being really open. And then I think if you do these practices over time, I really believe, and I've seen many examples of this, that the door stays ajar. So right. that you can almost sense when you're in a learning mode and you're starting to enter that learning mode. Right. And I think the brain has this ability, and it's absolutely accessible.
That's fascinating. So I'm going to offer this up and see if you can push back on it. But to me, like when I'm working with a beginner, like someone's new, and they say, well, just tell me what to do. Give me something to do. 3 things. And so my 3 things are brain health through nutrition. And when I'm talking about the brain, we're talking about fat and ketones and nootropics. Right? So brain health, get the brain healthy. Second, begin to move your body. And so that could be a CrossFit, it could be yoga, it could be Tai Chi, it could be burpees. Move your body. And when you move, breathe deeply and you know, use your positive internal dialogue, because now we're getting into that body-mind state. And then the third is breath training, breath practice. Because as I said earlier, the breath links the body, the mind, and you know, your deeper spiritual power, which we're going to disconnect from any concept of God, because it's basically what the intelligence and energy, the combined intelligence and energy that infuses us, which makes us conscious, right? So I say, move your body in the morning and box breathe for a minimum of 5 minutes, and do that every day.
How long do you recommend people do the inhale, hold, exhale, hold?
Beginners, a 4 count is probably perfect. A 5 count is, you don't need to do any more. It's not like Navy SEAL underwater breath hold training. And the reason the ratio is even count inhale, even count hold, even count exhale, even count hold, is that other ratios will have a different effect on you. And what we're looking for is balance. What I need to do is bring people back into balance. Physiological balance will lead to psychological balance. Then we can start, it's like weeding the garden. Then we can start doing some work on the quality and the content of the mind.
Do you suggest that people do pure nasal or?
Pure nasal.
Pure nasal.
Yeah. In a controlled training environment, it's pure nasal. But out in the field, let's say if you're walking around or something, if you can box breathe, it's great. You might exhale through the mouth. And then, you know, we shift to the tactical breath anytime our heart rate elevates, which is just slow inhale, slow exhale, no holds. It's impractical, right? The tactical breath is taught in the SEALs. Box breathing is now taught in the SEALs. At any rate, so those 3 to me are like the money, right? That's the foundation. After you've done that for a year, you know, it's going to be different for everybody, obviously. Then you can start to explore some meditative practices and visualization. Otherwise, if you start jumping into that, you're just not going to be able to hold your attention. You're going to be uncomfortable. You know, everything's going to be out of whack. You got to get the body mind back into balance first. Learn how to be able to sustain your concentration for a long period of time, and then you can begin to work with some of the deeper practices.
That's great. I mean, I think 3s are great. You know,
yeah, that's right.
3s and the simplicity of it.
3, right?
It's interesting because recently we had a brain mind summit at Stanford. This is something that's going to transition between Stanford, MIT, Oxford, and Cambridge. And and it's funded by the Rhodes Trust. It'd be great to get you out there at the next one. And I talked about box breathing, and I did credit you.
Thank you.
And I was trying to explain, you know, it's kind of interesting, you know, breath work kind of sounds like meditation, robes, and levitation. But as soon as I say respirate to my, you know, colleagues and people in the medical community, I say, you know, respiration work. Now it sounds kind of physiological. Right. Same thing, right? So, I like that. And there are some caveats to this, but in general, you know, as you alluded to, anything that's exhale emphasized, right, is going to blow off more CO2. It's going to drive people towards more parasympathetic relaxed states. Whereas anything that's more inhale emphasized is going to drive people towards more heightened arousal. And so box breathing is a perfect way to balance CO2 and O2 and get people into this kind of clear mindset. Because I think that a lot has been made of in the psychological space and also in neuroscience about emotions, one thing, and that's great, and there's a lot to tackle in terms of emotions, but they're very subjective. But I think the two states that most people would like to be able to access are clear, focused, and alert. Like, so that's one thing. So focused and alert, and asleep when they want to be asleep. So if there, and there are tools, but if there were tools that could ripple out through, you know, all societies, not just American society, that where people could deliberately set their state through box breathing, or better access sleep through sort of apnea-like breathing, meaning not sleep apnea, but exhale emphasized breathing, for instance, teaching their body how to relax that way. I think you do a tremendous amount to offset mental disease, and you would greatly improve the baselines on most people's life. And so when you describe these three things to implement, what I love about it is all of them are going to have real effects in real time. But I love to, and here I'm stealing from our friend Daniel Schmachenberger at the NHC. You know, he always talks to me about things that are either baseline elevating, baseline lowering, or baseline maintaining. Those are very different than the kind of like, you know, sort of peak event. And so I haven't done 40 years of Zen. I haven't talked to Dave in a long time, so I don't know exactly what the benefit set is there. But the idea that there's going to be one thing that can shift everything, to me, just doesn't fit with what we know about how the brain works, which is not to say that the 40 years of Zen program, it doesn't have value.
It might have some benefit,
it's just say, what is the adjustment on baseline over time? So in the Bay Area, the number one neurohack, I like to joke, is Burning Man, right? Everyone goes out there once a year and then they work like crazy all year long. What about your daily practices in terms of resetting your, sort of not even resetting, but supplementing your creativity, supplementing your focus ability? And so
the daily practices create this upward spiral of upregulation or up-leveling, right? And it's never linear. You know, even like physical practices and tracking, you know, let's say your bench press or something like that, it's never linear. You know, sometimes you plateau and everyone's like, oh my God, I'm not making it. All of a sudden, boom, they take a week off and they have this massive, you know, peak or spike. But I guess my point there is it's easy to track the physical progress, you know, but when it comes to psychological or the mind or emotional, it's not so easy to track.
That's right.
But through journaling and through, you know, through a self-awareness process, you can begin to see that you're moving along this trajectory, which is not flat. And nor is it in fits and spurts. It's more of a transcend and include, and then you have a deeper sense of awareness, more peace of mind, more focus, more and you can note that that's different than where you were 6 months ago. And then you may feel like, okay, I'm just practicing, and all of a sudden you have another transcend and include moment where you're just like, boom. And these are experienced like paradigm shifts or crystallizations or like a radical breakthrough of awareness or insights, and you know, comes in many different forms, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot of devices out there now, you know, measuring brain waves and this and that, and I don't want to be dismissive of any of them, but you know, most of the stuff that's designed to measure brain waves, both research grade and commercially available, is very surface level. You're not getting very deep into the brain, where a lot of the more core emotionally related or autonomic arousal related processes are occurring. And so it's not to say they don't have value, but I think that using an outward measure is great, because, you know, like, okay, stress response hits, you know, for a real life event, you can't prepare for it. That's the whole point. So so when it hits, you know, how quickly are you able to anchor yourself in that moment, right? Are you, you know, how clear is your cognition? I think, you know, those events are gonna come. So as I said, you can't prepare, but you can prepare in terms of your ability to navigate it, buffer it, leverage it, whatever it is. And so you obviously don't want to seek out high stress events necessarily, but measuring progress to me is about, you know, how many days pass in which I'm feeling on purpose, meaning moving toward the kind of core things I want to accomplish, in which there wasn't a major catastrophe. And if there was a major catastrophe, that I use that as an opportunity to leverage and move forward, right? And it does become a little bit subjective. I do think journaling is extremely valuable. I think there's something, there are, just as there is machinery installed in the human brain. I have a close friend at UCSF who studies this machinery to generate human speech. His name is Eddie Chang. He's an amazing guy, records from the human brain while people produce speech. We could talk about that. It's very interesting work. There are brain areas that have been installed in each of us to convert thought into written word by virtue of the hand, or if you're a hand impaired.
I agree with you. So that's why not getting away from writing is a big
it's horrible.
problem,
and drawing.
Right?
So there's a little bit of this coming out now about drawing, even if you don't draw well. About converting thoughts into 3D, into 2D space or 3D space. This is the first time in human evolution that humans have ever converted internal language to language with their thumbs. We've never really been typing with our thumbs. This is new. Yeah. The digits on your hand were designed with a specific purpose in mind. And a lot of the brain is visual, but human beings have the most wide variety of options in terms of how to move. So a cheetah can run fast, and it can lie down and sleep, and it can kind of do a cheetah trot, whatever you call that. But humans can sprint, they can jog, they can duck under things, they can dance, they can grab, they can reach, they can rock a baby, they can do an immense number of motor operations. There's a guy out of Harvard whose work I really love. He wrote Spark, which is about John Rady.
Book, yeah.
Tremendously smart guy, and he
talking
has this
about how the fitness has a really profound neuroplastic effect, right?
Right, about how to use physical entry points to access plasticity. Really fits very much in what we're describing here. And he has this other book called Go Wild, which is not about returning to caves, but it's really what he argues is that the two most dominant drivers of human happiness in his experience, which includes clinical experience, a lot of it are active social engagement and movement through natural terrain, which I find fascinating and so close to my own experience.
You mean like hiking? Or
like hiking or walking down the beach, or feeling what it's like to walk in the soft sand or run in the soft sand, or feeling waves or moving through a park, and just the visual flow component. And he and I have had a couple discussions about this, but in addition to breathing, I think I would love to hear about people starting to play with their visual system and seeing how that affects their mental states and arousal states. One of the ways that we know people can rapidly downregulate the stress response in real time is to just go into panoramic vision, what you describe as people describe as soft gaze.
This is how we can stack, some of these practices. So one of my practices, I live on the beach, is to go for a beach walk with my wife. And, it's a beautiful Pacific Ocean. And sometimes, in the beginning, there's a little chit chat. My wife, wanted to do a little of that and processing and stuff. So there's the emotional connection, there's a physical connection because we're holding hands. There's the immersion in nature. And so then what I'll do, I'll begin to stack in box breathing and wide angle vision, and then a mantra. And so, right, there's the I, the we, there's the emotional connection, there's the authenticity of bonding together in nature, and, there's the visual stimulus, like you said, the constant flow of those beautiful imagery. There's the mental control through the mantra, so my mind isn't distracting off on useless thoughts or non-important thoughts. There's the breath practice, and then there's walking barefoot, which is grounding. And so there's so much going on there, and that's simple, beautiful, 45-minute, or an hour-long walk on the beach or in nature is profound. Right?
Yeah, and probably engaging more components of your nervous system that were there for what you were designed to do than pretty much any other practice you could for sort of recovery and connection. And I enjoy.
It's so much easier to do that than to go to a float tank.
I love the notion of float tanks and cryos and things like that. And I think it's great that people are thinking about this.
But anything that has friction, because I even say this about exercise. If getting to the gym is the friction point, remove the friction point and just work out at home. Your body has all the tools, Yeah. Burpee created the burpee as the ultimate exercise, right? You got burpees, pull-ups, push-ups, squats, sit-ups, running in place.
Was there a guy named Burpee?
That's what I heard. I don't know if it's true. We need to Google that.
Poor guy took a difficult last name and transmuted it into a good physical
revered practice.
Pretty funny. the torture he must have put up with as a child. But,
so if you want to, float tank, I've done it. I did it 6 times. I stopped. I was like, there's no way it's worth my time to drive all the way to the float tank to do 60 minutes or more of silence. I can just sit down on my bench and get the same benefits. But I had to train myself to be able to go there, because I see why the float tank could be useful for someone who hasn't learned to do the sensory deprivation, right? Right. In the yoga tradition, one of the 8 limbs, the 5th limb is sensory turning in, sensory deprivation.
Interesting.
And so you learn to disengage your senses. Close your eyes, disengage the eyes. Close your ears off and disengage from sound.
Interesting.
Close your olfactory senses, and that can be trained. Isn't that interesting? And then you can go really deep.
The walking along the beach might not be something everyone has access to, but horizons are immensely powerful because they naturally draw the gaze into panoramic vision.
Absolutely.
And so you're not going to get this through your phone. I've thought about ways that we could create a device or implement, but you're just not going to. Actually, and there's so, just to make the argument of how relaxing it is, I'll just make the counter argument. If I want to stress somebody out, the best way I can do is to put them in a small confined environment for a long time where they don't see any kind of horizon. What ends up happening is interesting. You start falling deeper and deeper into your own internal autonomic response. It's almost like that second sphere I was talking about before, like two tethers or two spheres tethered together start to collapse onto one another. And you know, people sometimes get intrigued by these things like the Bourdain suicide and why would someone kill themselves? I don't have any data to support this, but and that was tragic, as are all suicides. But the one idea is that when these two spheres of focus collapse into the self, and the feelings are not pleasant, they're losing ability to sense that there's time beyond what they're experiencing. So most people can tolerate uncomfortable feelings for a second. So you say, well, if you can do it for a second, why not a minute? You do it for a minute, why not an hour? And the thing about depression and suicide, not to make the conversation dark, but is that when people are in those states, they have the sensation, even though they have the knowledge it's not true, they have the sensation that it's going to go on forever. Or that if they exit that sensation, it'll just return to again. So it's the kind of why try. The converse, though, is also true. So if you can, if you can start to move out that focus, walking on the beach, focusing on things outside your head, and sort of get that balance, kind of like your box breathing has the balance between O2 and CO2, kind of the balance between an internal dialogue and external events.
Yeah, I love that.
That's really the kind of relationship with the world that most of us want to be in, where you're not cut off from experience. You're not like buffering yourself, kind of like, this is why the word resilience is great, but it implies this kind of boundary between you and what's going on.
Right, yeah.
Whereas, when you start to achieve the kind of higher levels of mindfulness and awareness, it's like it's being in concert with your environment. You can stay connected to self and connected to what's going on. Then things can be pleasant or unpleasant, internally, externally, and you can kind of learn to move through that. And again, this is sounding a little bit abstract, but I think some of the concepts that have been brought forward in the in the martial arts and in yoga, like be like water, I've thought, but what does that mean? I think it's this idea that we can move fluidly through time and space, and that includes staying anchored to the self. There's not the idea that you have to forget about what you're experiencing. It's just kind of, what does it mean? How should I operate? And being able to do that really quickly. So I guess the point is that horizons are a powerful tool. I think they are a power tool in the regulating stress, just as much as closing your eyes and focusing on a third eye center, kind of traditional meditation, is a power tool.
This is fascinating because what's coming through my mind right now is that, a couple things, and I'll try to link them. One is, some of the POWs, right? So Admiral Stockdale is a great example. In a solitary confinement environment, no visual of the outside world, and what they did see was unpleasant. And so instead of collapsing into that and experiencing the awesome shame and self-pity that was being foisted on them, he turned to his visual capacity and began to imagine beautiful scenery. He began to imagine all these golf courses that he'd played on and replaying the holes and getting very good at it. He imagined himself back in the classroom and retook all of his courses with great, recollection, right? And so where I was thinking about is that, and I believe this too, and I'll describe a visualization that I teach, is that you can have that broad external focus internally. And you can also have a narrow focus internally, and both are important. And so this is important for anyone who meditates, because if someone says, well, the only way to meditate is to focus on the third eye, turn the eyes up a little bit and look for the white light, around the pineal gland. That's great, but it's also limiting because it's going to develop that internal focus, and you're going to stop having the capacity for the broad focus. The broad focus is through visualization. And so the visualization practice that we have, we call the mind gym, and that is we take people into a space that we claim is kind of a birthright, because everyone, when we lead them into this space, it's like, it's all of a sudden it's there, right? It's like some place they've never been before, but they have a sense that they've been there before. And it's always beautiful, right? I've never had any experience going into their mind gym and describing it as restrictive or ugly or dark. It's always this unbelievably beautiful landscape that has, you know, often mountains. Mine has beautiful snow-capped mountains and waterfalls, and we go there to visualize, to do our work. And it's this expansive feeling of awesomeness, like grace, connection. Profound. You know what I mean? Again, how do we test this? You know, you can't test someone's visual capacity. We don't have any instruments that can see what a human mind is seeing.
Probably not. You can do brain imaging, and, you know, everything we know about brain imaging says that, you know, if I close my eyes and imagine like this immediate environment, it's going to show patterns of activation similar to the real stimulus.
Give you the objective.
The brain is a slave to what's given to it or what it produces for itself.
Right.
I mean, that's become clear. And I think, but I love the notion of a mind gym. I think, you know, one thing that I'm realizing as we have this conversation is that being of healthy mind, and it's interesting, we talk a lot about mental health, but usually when people talk about mental health, they're talking about mental illness. But in thinking about mental health, we haven't really defined what the parameters of mental health are. We know what the physical health parameters are. We have a BMI, maybe, you know, body mass index, maybe that's legitimate, maybe it's not. You should have a certain level of flexibility or strength depending on the needs of your life, and, you know, and obviously you don't want cancer biomarkers running rampant and these kinds of things. But we have not defined what it is to be mentally healthy. Yeah. And I think,
to me, I would look for things like contentment, peace of mind, non-attachment, right? The ability to, like you even said this earlier, to disengage from the outcome, but still be very motivated toward an outcome. You know what I mean?
And I might add,
and how do you measure those? That's the question.
Right. How do you, right. And so I might add to those, you know, like, so what are the burpee, push up and pull up for the mind, right? And it sounds like, and I love that you're
breathing is certainly one of them.
So breathing is certainly one of them. I mean, I think a little more on breathing. I mean, to me, I've spent a lot of time with Wim Hof. We brought him out to the Bay Area. I brought him just as a friend to the Bay Area, and we did some talks. And you know, I would say Wim is like the Bob Dylan of breath work, right? He's this phenomenon in terms of how he can access these states and bring people into these states. They tend to be more inhale emphasized, and then although there are long exhales, and I don't want to destroy that, they have great protocols and people know how to access those. That has its utility. I think that breathing, just as a basic fundamental right and tool that people are using, is something that let's call it respiration, maybe for more access. If it brings more people in, then we'll call it that. I think has a tremendous benefit set. Now, full disclosure here, I consult for the Lung Health Institute, so you know, there it's dealing with people who have breathing issues. I think they can benefit from breath work, but just typical people, right? And like, it's like zero cost.
Sure.
You know,
free medicine.
Free medicine you can generate. It's an inside-out tool. It's immensely powerful. Just switching to nasal breathing, box breathing. These are absolutely power tools. And what's lovely is that it can be done covertly, right?
Anywhere. I've been doing it this whole
it can be done covertly, right? So no one has to know. Whereas meditation, the kind of idea you can also do covertly, but by closing your eyes and retreating to a corner of the room or something, you are taking yourself out of social engagement to some extent. And the other thing is what happens when the stress response hits. You can immediately anchor in breathing. Some people find that easier to do than others, but it's just practice. If you've been doing it,
train it, you'll do it. Yeah.
So I think, you know, I mean, you've been talking about this for a long time, so I want to give credit where credit's due, but I think that breathing that balances O2 and CO2, like box breathing, is something that I would love seeing taught in school in the same way that they make kids run the track or learn jumping jacks.
Absolutely.
It's a fundamental
skill.
God-given right, physiological right, and if you don't do it well, you can reclaim your breathing ability by breathing more. So it really is powerful. And I don't think we're making too much of it. I think it's that powerful.
Yeah. And it's got to be experienced. You know what I mean? It's hard for people to really understand, because like, well, I breathe. It's like, yeah, it's true. You breathe. But when you control that breathing and you do it in specific ways, whether it's Wim Hof or box breathing, then it has a very specific effect on your neurobiology, right? It's going to affect your physiology, then it's going to affect your
Absolutely.
psychology, and it's going to affect your ability to connect deeper, like we said, to that kind of spiritual strength, which is not even something that, the brain neuroscience community is ever going to really investigate,
No, although not spiritual strength. Although my lab, we do experiments on mice and where we can do very, invasive type things of recording from neurons. But we also have a human laboratory where we use virtual reality to expose people to different fear states.
I love that, yeah.
Heights, great white sharks, real filmed experiences, not digitally created experiences. Or cartoons, rather.
I'd love to experience that.
Yeah, you should come up.
I would love to do that.
I mean, you're a
That'd be kinda
mutant
cool.
based on your training and whatnot, so you'd be on a certain end of the scale in terms of outcomes. But I think it'd be fun still to see how we're measuring pupil size, breathing, heart rate, and in patients that mutant in a good sense. Mutations can be
Appreciate that.
people adaptive. There are adaptive mutations and there are non-adaptive mutations. I think your training and is a self-prescribed positive mutation. Wow, that sounded nerdy, but yeah, count on the neuroscientist.
I'm going to go back.
Say,
Sandy, I guess what? I'm a positive mutant.
Yeah, exactly. Well, like the X-Men, right? I mean, the reason I love the X-Men, it's all about mutations that give people, superpowers. Question of how you use them, right? So but we also have a population of patients that we have access to through neurosurgery who, for other reasons, have electrodes embedded in different regions of the brain. So we've been doing the first ever recordings from the human brain while people are in virtual fear experiences while measuring the body's responses.
Wow.
So to me, the field of neuroscience, I'm hoping there's going to be more of this, and we're not the only ones doing it, fortunately. We're going to start to merge heart rate, breathing, brain waves, we have direct recordings from human amygdala in a patient while they're literally have great white sharks swimming around them, heights. We're doing this in phobic patients, people with generalized anxiety. We're always looking for subjects. So if I may, I'm going to give a little plug to my lab. This is not a personal endorsement. If you can email us at, or we're on Instagram at Huberman Lab, but that's where we recruit subjects for these experiments. Your tax dollars, by the way, paid for this.
What kind of people are you looking for?
We're looking for people who have anxiety and people who don't have anxiety, who have specific fears and who aren't aware of whether or not they have specific fears. Unfortunately, we don't have
control groups are those who aren't aware. And
that's right. That's
those
right.
subjects who have a deep phobia of sharks or
that's right, or heights or dogs or claustrophobia.
Got it.
And one thing that's fun is a number of these are involved. Something I'm really interested in is task switching. So we put people through a setup. I don't want to give it away in case that you come to the lab where you're in a situation where you're doing a simple game that involves some cognitive control of putting out lights on a screen, and then suddenly you realize that you're in a much more threatening situation than you thought, and the task of the experiment is to toggle back and forth between maintaining your safety and performing an operation that's critical. And while we're doing this, we're monitoring all your physiological responses, because one thing that we want to get people better at is the ability to task switch. So
that reminds me of my Zen teacher, Nakamura. We used to be sitting in Zen, and this is actually, they still do it to this day. And you'd be there meditating, and all of a sudden he would come, behind you. Sometimes, if you knew, you could feel his presence, right? So you could be ready for it. But at first, you wouldn't have a clue. And he would just whack you over the shoulder with this bamboo stick.
That'll wake you up.
Yeah. And so the idea was, the Japanese concept was to spontaneous satori, spontaneous enlightenment, that in that moment of I'm in a completely relaxed, kind of meditative state, and all of a sudden, wham, and your whole physiology, psychology radically shifts to a threat environment, or to this like, boom, something else is happening here. And it does something to the psyche where you have this quick, usually temporary separation of, I guess, sense of self, right? And that experiences of a deeper connection to like reality or to time stand still. It's all these things we talked about all of a sudden happen, right? And this is the moment that the Zen monk begins to realize, that's why they call it realization. They realize that they're not the thought. They're not the thinker. There's more to what's going on in this human experience than just me processing this steady stream of thoughts. And so now it reminds me of what you were talking about, the two perspectives and the tether. We call it the witness. So the Zen monk is immediately connected to the witness, which is the pervasive, nonlinear perceiving mind. And that mind can now watch the thinking going on.
Super interesting.
Isn't that fascinating?
Time and space are so closely linked in the brain, so that if my visual focus is on this cup, for instance, my spatial reference is the mug, but my time reference is also locked to what's actionable. If I'm in panoramic vision, time is much more expanded because space is more expanded. And this is a real thing. You know, this starts to sound a little bit kind of woo, but it's not. Because the way that the brain works and the way the visual system works is to set up contingencies. What's actionable, what's not actionable. And I had
that's why we can slow time down.
That's why we can slow time down. And so in terms of life events, I don't think this is a digression, but I feel like it ties back into your meditation with the bamboo strike moment. You know, I've had as many people had, I've had the experience, I won't even call it the misfortune, but I had a close friend and colleague, very famous neuroscientist actually, pass away recently. I've had this weird thing about mentors. I'll just mention this. My first mentor in science was this phenomenal guy, taught me so much about the brain. Killed himself. And then my second mentor died of cancer at 50, and my third mentor died of cancer at 63. So the joke in my community is that like I'm the common factor, and you know you don't want me to work for you.
Don't ask me to be
And I don't say that to emphasize any of the tragedy, but what I learned something very fundamental from each of those. So I already talked about suicide, but it made me intensely interested in suicide, how someone could do that, right? Someone who has so much awareness about the brain tells you something about mental disease. It also tells you about this collapse onto self. The other two people who are phenomenal individuals, discussion for another time, both taught me something very interesting, which is as they got closer and closer to death, they started talking about directly to me about these incredible experiences that all represented the way I now reflect on them as carving up time in finer slices. So they could really appreciate like the sip of a cup of coffee and its most like as this intense experience and how grateful they were. And what I could see was happening was the end was coming and they were starting to micro slice time. Whereas normally I just think of like, I think I'm going to get home tonight. So I don't think about my cup of coffee in that same, there's not the same meaning.
Appreciate every moment.
So the dilation and contraction of this time representation is directly related to what we think of as meaning and importance and the value of everything and people. Because so I've thought about this recently in terms of grief. And so I have this idea, and maybe I'm crazy, but here's the idea. So my colleague died, and I walk by his office every day. We haven't hired someone new to replace him yet. You couldn't replace him, but to put someone new in the office. And every once in a while, I'll feel this pang of grief, and it's a sensation, and I'm familiar with that sensation. Many people have felt this, and I started thinking about like, okay, I don't want to overly intellectualize this, but what is grief, and why is it that I know, because I'm an adult, that in 5 years, this will be gone, right? It'll be a different feeling, and I think I understand, at least from my own process, which is that grief may very well be the actual mental operations and let's say nervous system, mind and body, of moving something that was once actionable into inactionable domain, like memory. So if I have my wallet and it gets stolen, I'm pissed and I'm sad, I'm upset. It's a kind of mild form of grief, nothing like losing a person, because it's no longer actionable. I can't just reach for it. Every time I want to reach for it, it's frustrating. Every time I walk by Ben's office and I can't go talk to him about a scientific problem or idea, and he was a magnificent thinker and human being, it pains me. But it's the idea that I can't go in there even though the office is right there. Now, at some point, that idea of that it's actionable will transition into the reality in a deep sense, because I know he's gone, that he's not an actionable figure in my life anymore. I can think about him, I can remember things, but the grief is gone. And so grief, so I was thinking, well, why would the human brain evolve this? And what's the utility of thinking like this? Well, for animals, if one member of their species were to die, the worst thing you can do from an infectious disease standpoint is to actually interact with the dead body. What do? We get it in the ground and we start to think about them as an inactionable character in our life. And we start to think about them more as a tombstone and an idea or memory, or ideally you think about their life. But you no longer think about calling them or texting them or writing to them or hugging them. And that process of moving that over, I think, is what we describe as grief. And so I'm using this as sort of an example of what I would love to see neuroscience do for what we've thought of as emotions, which are very challenging, but also for positive states and accessing things. And one reason why I think in this conversation, I realized that one reason why I think that science and military or ex-military communities are the ones who are going to be responsible for doing this is that science and the military are both great at putting protocol and language around concepts so that more, it's actionable, right?
So you can train it or teach it.
So how would you ever teach kids about what grief really is? So on the one hand, you're told to feel your feelings. On the other hand, you're told that, this too shall pass, okay? So it's all kind of muddled in language that is hard for most people to internalize. So I'm not saying that an intellectual understanding of something is designed to take it away, but I think if we understand what's happening, we're less likely to make bad decisions on the basis of that.
I agree with that.
Okay, so going back to space and time in a way that's maybe a little more positive and fun and actionable, I've long felt that if I want to get better at task implementation, I should learn to increase my focus. So so the practice for that would be, and I tell me if I'm wrong here, would be learning how to maintain a focal gaze at a particular location, just getting better at doing that when you feel like you want to air off it, staying on a little longer.
And that's the beginning practice of Zen, or staring at a candle, or a
so
koan,
increasing focus,
increasing your focus, and then increasing the duration, the quality of the focus, and then the duration of the focus.
Okay, so that's something I'm going to take away from this because that's something I definitely can benefit from still. And then the idea is that, but maybe to get better at being at ideas, then thinking about where those are pulled from. Ideas and creativity are actually pulled from the subconscious when space and time are kind of loose. So people talk about, I have my own thoughts, and I'm not crazy about the psychedelic craze as it stands now. We can talk about why that is. I think sleep is a very powerful tool for accessing creative thought. But maybe
into and out of sleep as well.
Into and out of sleep, the transition
absolutely. Phases are big.
Absolutely, those early phases, as well as maybe panoramic states in which you're kind of just taking everything in and you're not so focused on a fixation point, are practices to cultivate in order to generate more creativity, because in that mode, space and time are fluid, and you can create new contingencies.
Interesting.
And then the last thought tied to this is that not only are we not taught to do the sorts of things that you teach at the academy, but it's great that there are tools that are now available to people, but we're actually taught to do the opposite. So the first thing that happens when you're a baby is you're hungry, or you have to go to the bathroom, or whatever it is, but the baby doesn't know hunger. It just senses anxiety. It feels autonomic arousal. It's not even anxiety. It doesn't even know what anxiety is. And then it cries or whines or fidgets, and then all of a sudden breast milk or bottle milk is presented to it.
And
so the relieves it. So the first contingency we learn is outside in is the solution. The first contingency, it's like the first learning rule, and it's tied to our survival. It's like, okay, I feel anxious. I don't feel good. I make a noise, and then the relief comes from the outside.
It'd be hard to teach a baby box breathing.
Exactly.
Just breathe.
Exactly. Well, I don't have kids, but if I ever have kids, it's going to be one of the first things I teach them. I promise that. Because I think that one thing that we need to start doing is cultivating these inside-out tools. And because in tribal communities, it makes sense. The baby can't go and access its own nutrition or nutritional supply. So it has to do that. But at some point in life, I think becoming an effective human being is about learning these inside-out tools. And the tools are there. You're describing them. And they're related to these space-time relationships. And the ability to kind of open your toolkit and select, put back that tool and select another tool. Now you're really talking about moving into spheres of kind of elite performance. And here we're not even talking about sport, military, academia, music, poetry. We're talking about everything, parenting, everything. So I have to say that I think the algorithms that you've hit upon are fundamental. And I think that there are brain mechanisms that can support them. I think science's job is going to be to provide data where it's useful. But for instance, I don't think we need another study showing that meditation shifts the brain. No. The question is, what aspects of meditation shift the brain in the directions that we want to go? More plasticity, more focus, more creativity. And that's really the responsibility of my field and my colleagues. And the newer generation coming in, fortunately, has been exposed to a lot more in the kind of mindfulness space and physical augmentation space, for that matter, that they're thinking about it. So I don't think we'll ever actually understand how the brain works. Like, oh, and the answer is, it doesn't work that way, because it's dynamic.
Too complex.
It's dynamic, but the algorithms, I think, are universal. And so you can tell I'm sort of like I'm excited because when I have a conversation like we did today, I feel like the algorithms are starting to surface, and creating a common language is going to be very useful. Anyway, I'm expressing my own excitement for what you guys have done and for what's emerging in this space. I think and the next generation's coming, and they're going to have tons of ideas too.
Yeah,
So-
right. They're going to assimilate,
Right.
Transcend and include.
Right.
And, basically we'll be obsolete, and that'll be a good thing.
Right.
I mean,
Well,
our work is
hopefully
done.
they'll credit people properly, and hopefully what they'll eventually realize is that the brain hasn't evolved, right, to do many more new things in the form of these computations. It's applying the same algorithms to different things.
Yeah.
But anyway, I realize that I start speaking louder when I get excited, but it's a genuine excitement that that we're in this discussion and that people are accessing these kinds of discussions, because and I always am curious to hear about other people's insights. Every once in a while, someone will come up to me at a meeting or will write to me, and I'll think, wow, that's something truly unique and different that I hadn't thought of. Because I think the palette of choices out there about how to shift one's state are now pretty vast. I mean, just like the palette of ways you can tire flip, you can do CrossFit, you can run, you can swim, you can do, there's so many tools out there. But the fundamentals that they all supply are really what it's about. And likewise in the kind of cognitive neuroscience space.
And what I love too, for me, the future is like, okay, so if general population is starting to come back into balance and starting to do some basic training around body, mind, health, and breathing and visualization, then the next fear is to begin to tap some of the untapped potential that we haven't even talked about yet. You know what I mean? Like some of the extraordinary possibilities that I think the human mind has. And that'll be a future discussion, And then we got the intersection of AI and
Oh, that's wild.
enmeshed networks, neural networks, right? What is that going to look like?
Yep.
I think the next 20 years are going to be extraordinary. So it's important for everyone to kind of up-level their mental operating system, both physically, through proper nutrition and sleep and nootropics, but also through these practices, like we said, and to understand it from the neuroscience standpoint. So it's all critical, but that's just the beginning. That's to provide the foundation to kind of leap into what I consider to be a next evolution of like what it means to be human. Because technology is going to do that for us anyways, and if we don't up level, we're going to get buried, or we're going to destroy ourselves.
Yeah, we've certainly created enough things to make us suffer. It's kind of I sort of half joke that we're now creating technologies to buffer us against the technologies that we built.
Right.
Okay, so be it. And I guess but we're still in choice. I guess, to use the kind of workshop language. We're all in choice, and the great thing about the mind stuff, just like physical, you realize we were talking about before we started, like with a wall and a floor and gravity, you can give yourself a great physical workout,
right.
And just with the inner workings of your mind, you can do so much. And breathing, visual system, these things help, but it's all there. And I'm super excited to see where things lead. And because of the great thing about YouTube and podcasts and the digital space is that this information is wicking out further all the time. And that means we're going to access the people that really we would have not otherwise accessed.
Yeah, I think the next frontier will be virtual, like your experience of virtual reality, but it's in a controlled environment. But when everyone can have virtual reality, we can start to embed or develop some holographic training programs, that can plug people into a new state immediately.
Really feel like we're all in the same room.
Yeah, and begin to train focus and train awareness through a deep, immersive, 3 or 4D environment. I guess 4D would be where the time comes into play.
Yeah,
that's going to be interesting, right? And that's coming. It's coming.
I can't wait for this.
It's like the construct of the Matrix or the holodeck concept.
It's super exciting. It's so interesting to see how these communities around neuroscience and military and ex-military and athletics and how they're all converging on the same common set of goals. I think people all deeply want the same thing, and it's that feeling of, wow, I didn't realize I have that superpower, but now I have it. And in that sense, really seeing new opportunity, and it's super exciting to me.
I agree. Wow, I think we've been going for a little while here. probably should wrap this up. It's been an amazing conversation, Andrew. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been a pleasure. And
tell us tell the listener where you can, where they can learn more about your work and the studies, and do you have a web page and all that?
Yeah. So pretty easy to find. If you Google my name, Andrew Huberman, what you'll find is my lab webpage first, which is hubermanlab.com. That describes the people and things, the people in my lab and the things that we do, the range of things. I didn't talk today, but we run clinical trials for optic nerve repair and glaucoma and things of that sort. So there's a lot there, as well as the fear, courage, and plasticity work. And then we have an Instagram, which is at Huberman Lab, where I post information both about the work that we're doing, but also what I find to be some of the exciting work in neuroscience around plasticity, pain management, some actionable stuff. Just pulling from the papers that come out. It's not always accessible in the language that it's written, and so I try and convert it into language that is accessible to everybody. And in either of those places, you'll find contact information where if you're interested in being in our studies, that would be great. The science thanks you. I thank you if you decide to do that, and even if you don't. So those are the two major entry points if you want to learn more about what we do. And I just also want to thank you for this opportunity to be here. I know your programs. I have tremendous respect for what you've done and what you're doing. And this has been immensely stimulating for me. So thank you so much.
You're welcome, and thank you. And I look forward to getting up to San Francisco. Now that my son's going to school up there, that's a no-brainer, so to speak. So I want to come visit your lab and be immersed with the sharks.
Terrific.
And you can poke and prod me and see if I'm human. Yeah. My nickname in the SEALs was Cyborg, so it's still.
So there you go.
Jury is still out.
There you go. we'll figure it out one way or another. We'll take the measurements.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, and
thank you.
Folks, thanks for listening. Like I said, it's always an honor to have your attention. So stay focused and relax the gaze on occasion, and train hard. We'll see you next time. Hoo-yah. Hey, this is Mark Devine. Thanks very much for watching the Unbeatable Mind podcast on YouTube. You can also find the podcast at iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, and unbeatablemind.com/podcast. Be sure to check out the new episode released every week. Hoo-yah.